Story 1.
I discovered my wife was cheating, exposed her in front of everyone, and recorded the whole scene. My journey didn't begin as I had hoped. On Thursday and Friday, I was supposed to go to a conference in Minneapolis, but it wasn't the usual warm send-off I was used to. My wife, Martha, usually took half a day off to make my departure memorable, but this time she just gave me a quick goodbye kiss before going to work. Let me introduce myself. I'm Ava, but people often call me Evan. I'm 49 years old, happily married to Martha for 24 years, and we have 2 kids, Ross, who's 22, and Amelia, who recently turned 20. My journey started at 3 in the afternoon. I left work and headed to the airport. I always like to arrive early for my 6 p.m. flight to avoid any stress about being late. Everything was going smoothly, and I waited patiently for the announcement of the flight's departure. However, luck was not on my side this time. The flight to Minnesota was delayed due to bad weather and an impending snowstorm. After a 45-minute delay, we finally boarded the plane. About 30 minutes into the flight, I noticed the plane making a subtle leftward turn. At first, I thought it was a minor adjustment, but it became clear that we were turning around. The pilot confirmed that due to the severe snowstorm, we couldn't land in Minneapolis, so we had to return to where we started. Back on solid ground, I hurried to the airline's check-in desk to rearrange my plans for the next morning. Fortunately, I managed to get one of the last available seats on the next flight. Despite missing the conference, I was determined to attend. As I sat down, a glimmer of hope emerged, but I couldn't get to the conference immediately. I called my contact in Minneapolis to let them know about the delay and left a detailed message on my boss's voicemail. Anxiously, I called home, hoping to hear Martha's comforting voice. To my shock, she didn't answer, and the house was dark, with her car gone from the driveway. I left my luggage in the car and cautiously entered the house. I heard voices coming from the living room, which surprised me. It turned out the TV had been left on, and that led me to a troubling conclusion. Martha had apparently come home after work, and I clearly remembered turning off the TV before leaving. I silenced the TV and searched for any sign of her but found none. Anxiously, I called her mobile phone. Finally, she warmly inquired about my whereabouts, a question that had become a familiar part of our marriage, now tinged with genuine concern and interest. In response, she mentioned that she was at home watching TV shows. As she spoke, the weariness of my long journey began to wash over me. In that moment, my sole desire was to be with my wife, seeking solace in her presence and sharing closeness, even if only for a few precious hours. Despite the flight delay, I held on to the hope of unexpected joyful hours in the comfort of our own bed. However, within just 30 seconds, the contentment of returning home was replaced by a profound sense of uncertainty. Instead of anticipating the warm embrace of my devoted wife, with whom I had shared 24 years of love and trust, I was confronted with the shocking revelation of lies and deception. It was an unexpected blow that left me speechless and unsure. I couldn't help but question whether she had truly cheated on me and why she would do such a thing. There appeared to be no logical explanation for her deceit. Whether it occurred while she was at work, with friends, or at a restaurant, I must have remained silent for a while. As Martha's worried voice eventually broke through, asking if I was still present, I snapped back to reality and mumbled in response, yeah, sorry, we've landed in O'Hare and I have to go." With a heavy heart, I abruptly ended the call. The phone rang again, but this time I turned it off, needing some solitude to make sense of my racing thoughts. Sitting on the couch, surrounded by silence and emptiness, I felt numbness wash over me. The question haunted me. Why did Martha deceive me? Maybe there was a reasonable explanation for the lie. Perhaps she was planning a surprise. Thinking back, I recalled how I had organized a series of deceptions 4 years ago for our 20th wedding anniversary. I had secretly arranged a 2-week cruise and involved her boss and parents in the plan, creating a web of deception. The memories of that lie came rushing back. In the midst of my confusion, one persistent thought crept in, which I vehemently rejected. It was a thought I refused to accept, not us. We wouldn't be in this situation. It was simply inconceivable, and that, I thought to myself, was it. Realizing that my daughter Amelia might know about all of Martha's surprises and plans, I quickly dialed her number from memory. My beloved daughter's voice greeted me on the phone and asked how I was. I inquired with genuine curiosity about her well-being, and she replied, saying she had just finished her homework and was watching TV. Feeling the importance of the situation, I cautiously asked if she had talked to her mom recently and if Martha had mentioned anything to her. Amelia mentioned they had their usual weekly phone call on Sunday, giving me a glimmer of hope. I then asked her if she happened to know anything about a surprise Martha was preparing. I made it clear that I didn't want to know the nature of the surprise, only if Martha was planning something. My voice held anticipation as I waited for her response. Amelia's reply shattered my hopes. She mentioned that she didn't know anything and inquired about what was going on, Unaware of my worry, I came up with a feeble explanation. I told her that Martha had been acting a bit strange lately, and I wondered if she was hiding a nice surprise, perhaps for my 50th birthday. Amelia quickly dismissed the idea, reminding me that we had celebrated my birthday last month, having failed to get any information. I accepted the truth and wished my daughter a good night, she replied, sounding dejected. I realized that the surprise I'd hoped for wasn't going to happen. The question remained, why would Martha deceive me? Possible explanations started to form in my mind. Perhaps it's related to an upcoming promotion. That's likely the case, I concluded, even though I couldn't understand why she would lie. I considered the possibility that she was still working hard to achieve that elusive promotion. Lately, she had to stay late at work several times due to her unwavering dedication. However, deep down, Martha knew that no promotion could outweigh the value of the time we lost together. She understood that I wanted her to reduce her work hours so we could spend more time together, a reasonable request that she understood. Ironically, I recalled an important decision I made a few months before our 20th anniversary, turning down a promotion. It had been nearly 5 years since I had enthusiastically accepted a job offer to become the vice president of finance at my company. But this role required frequent travel to the company's headquarters in Chicago for board meetings and visits to various factories across the country. Initially, I was excited about the job offer, but Martha quickly raised doubts, making me reconsider my decision. The cautionary tale of a colleague who went through a divorce just 2 years after accepting a similar position couldn't be ignored. While financial success was a reward for him, it came at the cost of loneliness and suffering. Given the circumstances and the fact that our children still needed guidance and support through their remaining years of school, Martha understandably didn't want to take on this responsibility alone. Throughout the week, we had in-depth discussions about the potential consequences of accepting the promotion. Gradually, it became clear that I was on the verge of losing sight of what truly mattered in my life, my wife and children. Regaining clarity, I made a heartfelt decision to decline the promotion, recognizing that my commitment to my family took precedence over material success. The past few months had been challenging as Martha pushed hard for her promotion. It brought back the doubts I had about my own career growth. Since our children were now in college, our family consisted of just the two of us. While Martha thought her promotion was attainable with minimal impact on our lives, such as more business trips, I worried about the many hours of overtime I would need to put in. Seeing my wife for only an hour or two a day during the week left me dissatisfied. Brief moments together didn't bring contentment, and the lack of quality time together weighed on my heart. The decline in our closeness couldn't go unnoticed. Martha became increasingly engrossed in her work, spending Saturdays and even Sundays at the office. When she returned home, fatigue consumed her, leaving no energy for anything else. It had been a while, if not impossible, to remember the last time we were close. 3 weeks ago? Last month? Specific details blurred into a depressing haze. Acknowledging that age contributed to our diminishing physical connection, it was hard to ignore the sad lack of intimacy we used to share. It's possible that her deception during our phone call was an attempt to avoid discussing my concerns and hide behind her work commitments. However, it's only fair to admit that I, too, was on a business trip and had to work overtime occasionally. At the same time, there was a simple way to uncover the truth. I decided to call Martha's direct line at the T-Bold advertising agency to confirm things. To my surprise, her colleague, Jake Turnbull, answered the phone. Alarmed, I quickly composed myself, expecting to hear Martha's voice. I greeted him using my nickname, and his response caught me off guard as he mentioned that I should be enjoying a vacation with Martha. I was shocked and confused by his comment, and it was clear that something was amiss. That evening, I found myself in a web of surprises and inquired about the supposed vacation. Afterward, I quickly regained my composure, apologized to Jake for the interruption, and fabricated an excuse, claiming that I had dialed his number by mistake. He reassured me without any concern, mentioning that Martha owed him lunch for covering her shift and the late working hours. He expressed his frustration, saying that it was 9 in the evening and he was still at work. With that, he concluded the conversation and hung up. Gradually, the truth became clear to me. Martha wasn't working and was in fact absent from her workplace. According to Jake, she had taken a vacation until the end of the week. Panic slowly crept into my mind, tightening its grip as fear took hold. Where was Martha? What could she be doing? An unwelcome but silent thought invaded my mind. No, it couldn't be true. I've always strived to see the best in people, maintaining a positive outlook and valuing the inherent kindness in everyone. But now, against my will, I started contemplating the worst-case scenario. Could this really be happening? Could Martha betray me like this? The thought of her being with her sister Victoria crossed my mind involuntarily. Over time, we distanced ourselves from Victoria and her ex-husband Mike. Once, we were incredibly close, bound by strong friendships that felt unbreakable as our lives intertwined in a beautiful tapestry of shared experiences. We spent evenings together, supported each other, cared for our children, organized numerous family gatherings, and even went on vacations together. But everything changed one fateful day. When I returned home with a throbbing headache in search of relief, I took a couple of Tylenol tablets and laid down on the couch. Half an hour later, Martha and Victoria returned from a shopping trip, chatting animatedly. Unnoticed by them, I remained on the couch. Suddenly, Victoria began to speak, asking if Martha had noticed the new product manager at the grocery store. My heart raced as I anxiously awaited Martha's response. She calmly replied that she found him cute, admitting that he had smiled at her. Then, with unease, she added that it would be better if he were smiling after yesterday's encounter in the backseat of her car, declared defiantly by Victoria. To my surprise, my wife responded disapprovingly, cautioning Victoria that she might get caught, risking the loss of a good husband and more. Unfazed, Victoria responded confidently, assuring Martha that she was always careful. With those words, they abruptly left, leaving me in a state of uncertainty. As someone who values honesty and integrity, I struggled to bear the weight of this revelation. Uncertain of the right course of action, I found myself at a crossroads. One thing was clear: Mike deserved to know the truth. Hearing about Victoria's infidelity would undoubtedly devastate him, and the thought weighed heavily on my heart. I knew that Mike, upon learning of her betrayal, would not hesitate to kick Victoria out of their home. I carried the burden of potentially causing the collapse of their marriage. Did I really want to be the reason for such a profound change? Before I could reach a final decision, my wife returned home with our children. Comforted by the fact that she disapproved of her sister's actions, I decided to postpone my decision until we could discuss it further. That evening, as we prepared for bed, I broached the subject, seeking her guidance. I cautiously began explaining the situation and sharing the news of discovering infidelity in our circle. Her expression initially revealed uncertainty as I asked, in all seriousness, what I should do, and whether confronting the cheater with anger was an appropriate response. Martha took a moment, carefully considering the circumstances surrounding the situation. She began slowly, suggesting that it might depend on the specific situation and that there were various factors to consider. Seeking further clarity, I presented hypothetical scenarios for discussion, inquiring about our friend Mike and whether we should turn a blind eye if he had cheated before and picked up a woman at a bar. I wanted to know her viewpoint. The weight of the situation hung in the air as I contemplated potential courses of action. Suddenly, Martha sat up in bed, gripping the phone tightly and expressing her anger. It was clear she felt compelled to take immediate action and informed Victoria about the betrayal. Instinctively, I gently took her phone and told Martha that I would handle the situation as it was my responsibility. Martha had doubts about the correctness of our decision and asked what was going on. I responded confidently, assuring her that I was sure and hoped that Victoria would kick the cheater out of the house. Martha looked at me with determination in her eyes, affirming that we wouldn't let him stay with us. She declared firmly that he could find his own place and that she wouldn't shelter a cheater in our home. Luckily, things played in my favor, and Mike answered the phone. I began with a heavy sigh, addressing him as his favorite son-in-law. Mike responded with a touch of humor, acknowledging that I was his only son-in-law, making me automatically his favorite. He asked what was so important that I was calling so late. After taking a deep breath, I cautiously continued, warning him that I had overheard a conversation and had devastating news to share. I told him that his spouse hadn't been faithful and had cheated on him just yesterday. There was a long pause on the phone as Mike absorbed this shocking revelation. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible, filled with disbelief. He expressed his doubt, asking if I was absolutely certain it was about his Victoria. I confirmed that I had heard it directly from her own mouth, describing it as more of a boast, without a hint of remorse. Expressing my condolences, I offered my support and told him that we were there for him and the kids. Mike reassured me and hung up the phone. Martha looked at me with sadness in her eyes, tears welling up. She whispered that she was proud of me and asked for a hug. Feeling lost and scared, I embraced her and offered comfort in the face of uncertainty. After a moment of calming down, I inquired about whether they should consider seeing a therapist, curious about their potential next steps. Martha, feeling weary, mumbled sleepily, expressing doubt about whether therapy would change anything and mentioning that once someone has strayed, they tend to do it again. I quietly agreed with her assessment. The ringing of the phone roused me from sleep, and I answered groggily, trying not to disturb Martha. Victoria's furious voice lashed out at me, demanding answers about what I had told Mike. I responded calmly to Victoria, stating that I had told Mike the truth and emphasized the importance of honesty. As Martha watched with concern and resolve, Victoria's voice was filled with anger, as she expressed disbelief that her sister would betray her. I firmly replied that sometimes the truth comes out unexpectedly, and we both agreed that cheaters should face the consequences. Victoria's tears began to flow uncontrollably, and she confessed that Mike had kicked her out of the house. I reiterated that it was a deserved consequence. Victoria pleaded desperately, asking what she should do and if she could come to us. Regretfully, I replied that we couldn't provide refuge to a cheater and that she would have to navigate the situation on her own. Victoria seemed shocked by my response, and I turned to Martha for guidance, asking her what to say to a cheater who wanted to come to us. Martha leaned towards the phone and firmly declared that she didn't want a cheater in her house and told her to get lost. I then conveyed a message on behalf of both of us, stating that Victoria was no longer a part of our lives and that she should stay away from us. We didn't want her to come or call. Martha snuggled closer to me, and we sought comfort in each other's arms. She whispered that she was proud of how I had handled the situation, and we peacefully drifted off to sleep. However, the morning brought an unexpected storm as Martha's father called and yelled at his daughter. Martha was anxious and tearful after the phone call. I explained to Martha that it was our mutual decision and that we had discussed the possibility of seeking advice and ending our connection with the deceiver. I clarified that I had only mentioned a hypothetical scenario about Mike and hadn't asserted that he actually cheated on Victoria. I posed a thought-provoking question, asking how Mike's potential betrayal differed from Victoria's infidelity. Martha defended her sister, stating that Victoria was family. I expressed disappointment and questioned if it was acceptable to cheat on someone because they were family, leading Martha to be momentarily speechless. 3 years ago, I had a pivotal conversation with Martha, asserting my stance about her sister. I made it clear that I didn't want her sister near our children or in our home. Although Martha occasionally met her sister secretly, it remained an unspoken taboo in our household, and she visited Victoria covertly while I was away. Over time, Mike managed to overcome the situation and prepare for remarriage, and my resentment toward Victoria waned. I had stopped caring about her presence and found joy in her absence. Shifting my focus to Martha, I gently broached the subject, feeling the need to resolve the issue. I suspected that Martha might carry guilt for deceiving me, although I had reached a point where I no longer cared. A surprising turn of events unfolded as I found myself on a stage in front of a vast audience at the Congress. I began my speech, addressing the crowd and discussing two distinct types of individuals in the realm of tissue use: deniers and those who confront reality. During the talk, Dave Millant, Martha's boss, waved his hand wildly and confessed to evading my wife. Jake Turnbull, seated behind Dave, also admitted to evading my wife. Another man joined in with a cheeky comment, creating a moment of shared amusement and light laughter among the audience. Suddenly, I sat up on the couch, wiping drool from my face, and realized it was already midnight. I must have slept for over an hour, and I wondered if Martha had returned home during my nap, possibly unaware of my presence as an unexpected guest. Hastening toward the bedroom, I entered but found no signs of her. Then it dawned on me that she was likely with her sister Victoria. Contemplating whether to contact Victoria and inquire about Martha's whereabouts, I hesitated, realizing that obtaining Victoria's address would entail acting behind Martha's back. Recalling that I needed to pick up Victoria's children from a specific location, I wondered if I still had Victoria's phone number. As I prepared to search my contact list, I noticed the Find My Phone app icon on my smartphone. A year ago, I had installed it on both our phones after losing mine during a trip from New York to Cincinnati. Recognizing its capabilities, I promptly opened the application. Within seconds, I received information about Martha's phone's location. It indicated Mills Lake. I was puzzled, wondering why she would be there. Contrarily, Victoria was facing financial difficulties, making it unlikely for her to afford a cottage on Mills Lake. The situation was becoming increasingly mysterious. Mills Lake was renowned as an upscale residential area, with cottage costs far exceeding those of our modest home. Using Google Earth, I carefully pinpointed Martha's precise location. To my surprise, she was inside an exclusive estate surrounded by an imposing stone wall. This revelation left me baffled. What could Martha be doing in such a luxurious millionaire's estate? The distance between Mills Lake and our town was an hour's drive, but my determination to uncover the truth propelled me forward. At the same time, I realized that a direct conversation with her would likely result in dishonesty or evasion. Gathering indisputable evidence was essential before initiating a conversation. Despite my hesitations, flooded with intense emotions, I quickly headed to Mills Lake, reproaching myself for refusing to consider the possibility of Martha's wrongdoing. Regret gnawed at me as I realized I should have checked her phone's GPS locator right from the start, instead of seeking excuses for her actions. Uncertainty clouded my thoughts as I arrived at Mills Lake, uncertain of my intentions and harboring a faint hope for a straightforward explanation. Anxious, I made my way to the estate where Martha was located, weighed down by the anticipation of what awaited. Before me loomed a massive gate barring direct access to the estate. I wasn't planning to drive up to the house and announce my presence in search of my wife. After assessing the situation, I understood that parking by the road might attract unwelcome attention, possibly leading to the arrival of security guards or law enforcement in this exclusive community. Driving a bit further, I stumbled upon a humble path and decided to park the car there. Stepping out, I grappled with uncertainty. How would I bypass the towering wall separating me from the truth? Then it dawned on me that the estate bordered the lake, meaning an approach from this side was possible. With renewed determination, I made my way to the lakeshore, my heart racing at the prospect of finding an entry point to the estate from this direction. Discovering a footpath leading to the lake, I cautiously moved toward the shoreline. Not knowing which grand cottage Martha was in, I counted on another check of the GPS locator. In the end, I reached a luxurious mansion where several second-floor windows still had lights on. However, the ground floor was dimly lit. Only one curtain remained ajar, casting warm light outside. Seeking an elevated vantage point, I found a sturdy tree and climbed high enough to peer inside. My gaze settled on a man wearing a white terry-cloth robe, though he was hardly recognizable to me. The man, appearing older than me, swiftly vanished from view. A moment later, a woman emerged, confirming my suspicions. It was Victoria. She stood in an open robe, sipping champagne from a glass. I couldn't deny that she remained attractive at her age. The pieces began to fall into place, and I realized that Martha was indeed with her sister. This revelation didn't surprise me. Given the financial implications of a divorce, it seemed likely that Victoria was seeking a wealthy partner. Yet, I couldn't help but think that Martha had been drawn into a lifestyle I disapproved of and didn't want for her. As events unfolded before my eyes, I witnessed a scene that left me disheartened. The man I initially spotted approached Victoria, and his hands boldly explored her body. He took her champagne glass, discreetly setting it aside. I had to climb down from the tree and avert my eyes from this closeness display of my sister-in-law's allure. My sensibilities were rooted in traditional notions, where love and physical intimacy formed the core of a genuine relationship between a man and a woman. What I observed felt devoid of love, lacking the connection and affection I held dear. Even if I didn't hold Victoria in high regard, I wouldn't wish such a destructive and empty existence on anyone. Feeling uneasy with the scene unfolding before me, I contemplated descending from the tree. However, as the couple moved away from the window, I locked eyes with Martha. She sat on a distant couch, sporting a foolish, inebriated smile. My heart sank. Frozen in bewilderment, her robe was open, revealing a sight that sealed the fate of our marriage. Overwhelmed by shock, I took a hesitant step backward, but lost my footing and tumbled from the tree. Branches broke my fall, and I was fortunate to escape with minor injuries. In a daze, I got to my feet, feeling like an old man under the weight of what I had witnessed. I started wandering aimlessly, like a zombie adrift in a desolate world. Tears welled up in my eyes as I limped my way back to the car, reflecting on the profound pain that consumed me. It wasn't the physical fall from the tree that caused me pain, but the emotional loss of happiness and the separation from a loved one. During those distressing minutes, I briefly considered breaking into the cottage, forcing my way inside to confront the situation. However, the harsh reality of the consequences, potential years in prison for trespassing and assault, quickly extinguished this desire. Alone with my thoughts at night, a storm of emotions raged within me. Denial could no longer shield me from the harsh truth, and I grappled with profound sadness and simmering anger. Yet I recognized the danger of letting that anger consume me, understanding that it would only further damage my own life. Deep down, I knew that no matter how angry I was, I would never resort to physically harming Martha. As events unfolded, I considered various options. The simplest one would be to return home, pack my belongings, and leave her. If we lived in a no-fault divorce state, had separate incomes, and no dependent children, the divorce process would likely proceed smoothly. We would divide our property equally and part ways. However, despite this straightforward path, a part of me yearned for justice and the desire to exact some form of revenge. A bold idea took hold of my thoughts, and without hesitation, I decided to seize the moment and see how it played out. Clutching my phone tightly, I dialed Martha's number, anticipating that she might not answer and I'd be directed to her voicemail. I hoped she'd check her voicemail right away just in case. "Hi, honey," I began, projecting my voice onto the answering machine recording. "Since you didn't pick up the home phone, I'm calling you on your mobile. I wanted to alert you not to be alarmed when you hear my keys in the door in a few minutes." Amid the chaos of a flight delayed by a blizzard and uncertain arrival times, I left a message for Martha. It had been a chaotic evening, and I outlined the challenges we faced. Our flight had been diverted to Chicago, but we were finally on our way back home. They couldn't pinpoint our exact landing time, but I estimated I'd be home in about 30 minutes. Then I said goodbye and hung up. Knowing Martha would receive a notification of a new voicemail, curiosity and anxiety would undoubtedly eat at her late into the night. Leaving a message at that time was unusual, adding to the intrigue. I pictured her reaching for the phone, eagerly checking her voicemail, hoping for clarity amid the chaos. I silently prayed that Martha would be intoxicated enough not to notice that I couldn't use my mobile phone during the flight. Panic must have been growing inside her. She realized she might be ensnared in her own deceitful web. In a fit of rage, she was likely contemplating how to get ahead of me and rush home, hastily dressing and fielding questions from her sister and lover. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts, and I quickly answered, realizing that she might be trying to gauge my time of arrival. I began the conversation with a weary tone, apologizing for potentially waking her up. She replied, assuring me that it was okay and informed me that she was on her way home, expecting to arrive in about an hour, give or take a few minutes. Martha acknowledged my response with a simple okay and ended the call promptly. I soon saw her car exiting the estate's gates and speeding down the highway. My heart skipped a beat as I witnessed her reckless driving, nearly swerving into a ditch. It became evident that she was much more intoxicated than I initially thought. Although I felt anger and frustration, I realized that her actions posed a threat not only to herself but also to innocent people on the road. Despite my lingering resentment, I couldn't bear the thought of her life being in jeopardy as the mother of my children. Determined to ensure her safety, I decided to follow her, ready to intervene if necessary. Thinking quickly, I dialed special services and informed the operator that I wanted to report a drunk driver. I described the car's erratic behavior, how it had almost collided with mine, and its reckless swerving. I also provided details about the car, mentioning that it had pulled onto the south side of the highway at Mills Lake and was a dark blue Ford Taurus. I had memorized the last 4 digits of the license plate and emphasized the urgency of stopping the car before its driver caused harm. The operator thanked me for my report and assured me that a patrol car was on its way to apprehend the intoxicated driver. Keeping a safe distance, I continued to tail Martha, navigating the traffic carefully. 2 exits later, I noticed a patrol car approaching her location. From a distance, I could see a patrol car parked on the bridge facing the highway. As Martha's car came into view, the patrol car quickly accelerated, flashing its lights to signal her to pull over. I drove past them, feeling a mixture of relief and deep sadness. 45 minutes later, I arrived back home, the weight of the evening's events heavy on my shoulders. It seemed almost ironic, but undeniably tragic. In a single night, the life of someone I deeply loved could have been reduced to a series of unfortunate consequences. A somber realization settled within me, making me consider that Martha's actions could have resulted in a fatal car accident and the subsequent grief and suffering for my children. I paused to reflect, allowing my fears to surface, acknowledging the fragility and preciousness of life. My love for Martha was no longer a central factor in the decision I had made. It wasn't that I had stopped loving her, but I could no longer envision a shared future together. I took drastic measures by turning off the home phone and silencing my mobile phone. I needed some privacy to gather my thoughts. As I reflected on the hours spent searching for an explanation for Martha's deception, I realized that the most straightforward explanation had been right in front of me all along. Disappointed in myself, I opened a bottle of wine and contemplated the path forward. For many years, I believed that my love for Martha would mature like a fine wine and eventually reach its zenith. Now, confronted with the reality of our strained relationship, I faced the challenging question of what to do next. As I continued to sip wine and the night unfolded, I searched for clarity and direction amidst the whirlwind of emotions that engulfed me. The love that had once bound us, now felt like it had, turned into bitter vinegar, leaving me in agonizing pain. The depth of her betrayal struck me to my core, but the pain was not solely from the betrayal itself. It was the realization that our love had withered away. This love had defined me for the past 26 years, 24 of which were spent as husband and wife. Without her, I felt lost, like a soul adrift, devoid of purpose and self-identity. Could I go on without this love? The pain intensified, making me contemplate putting an end to the suffering, perhaps by finding solace in the depths beneath a bridge. I had never imagined living without Martha. Starting life anew felt like an insurmountable challenge filled with uncertainty. How do you plan your life when a person who has been your everything is suddenly gone? I was at a loss, unsure of where to begin. Making decisions without consulting Martha seemed inconceivable. Family had always been the focal point of my life. I carefully weighed every choice, considering the well-being and happiness of my wife and children. Even our social life revolved around our family's needs, and I rarely engaged with colleagues and others. While I attended obligatory work events like the annual Christmas party, my priority had always been getting back home quickly. The times I ventured beyond these obligations were few, Over the past decade, I'd occasionally reminisce about the times when we socialized with colleagues. But now, with the kids gone, it was just Martha and me. And now I found myself alone, engulfed in my sadness. I had no one to love, no one to lean on. For the first time in my life, loneliness became my unwelcome companion. Why did she choose this path? Why resort to cheating, when a straightforward divorce would have been more painful but perhaps more considerate of the years and joyful moments we shared? When did she stop loving me? Did she merely endure our relationship until our children grew up and moved away? When did her care and attention wane? As our children embarked on their own journeys, I saw it as an opportunity to invest more in Martha and our relationship. I didn't realize that she saw it as the end of our shared path. I watched as a stranger became a constant presence, suggesting they were comfortable with each other, or perhaps how easily deception had infiltrated our lives. Martha and her lover, leaving me isolated and unloved, made it evident that we were no longer a couple. In the midst of despair, my pain became a connection to life. It served as a painful reminder of what I had lost, of the best moments we had shared, and most importantly, of the presence of our children. In that dark moment, my children became my saviors, casting a glimmer of hope upon me. My self-esteem had plummeted to the point where I lacked the strength to lift myself out of the abyss of despair. My children came to my rescue. Just thinking about them provided a faint spark of self-preservation. Soon, Ross and Amelia would go on their independent journeys and start their own families. To shield myself from the impending wave of grief, I realized I needed to distance myself from all of it. It wasn't an easy task, but it was filled with pain. I understood that I'd always carry the memory of Martha, of how I loved her, but I'd also remember her with another man. I needed to extricate myself from this situation. Throughout my life, I had always been content with simple expectations. Even though my parents weren't wealthy, I had the fortune of growing up in a family where deep affection prevailed. The material possessions that now surrounded me seemed insignificant in comparison. As I contemplated everything I owned, I realized that clothes, a car, and a laptop were the only items worth taking with me. The more I thought about it, the clearer my path out of this predicament became. I made the decision to pack my belongings and disappear without a trace. I no longer wished to gaze upon the woman who had once been the center of my universe. Just seeing her would serve as a painful reminder of my loss and the constant ache within me. With renewed determination, I rose from my seat, ready to act decisively. I swiftly packed several bags, and it took me only 30 minutes to do so. Soon, I was loading my things into the car. It was just shy of 6 in the morning when I completed the packing. Exhausted yet resolved, I decided to take a brief nap, confident that Martha would still be in detox until late in the morning. When I closed my eyes, thoughts filled my mind about starting afresh. My phone's alarm woke me at 9 a.m. Without delay, I scheduled an urgent meeting with a lawyer. Following that, I headed to the shower to symbolically wash away the remnants of the past. With a heavy heart, I removed my wedding ring and placed it solemnly on the table next to the phone. This final act marked the beginning of my journey toward a new chapter in my life, one where I sought personal liberation and happiness. I had made the painful decision to express my disappointment in a letter addressed to Martha. Although our conversation had reached a point where it seemed futile, I felt the need to express my emotions. Martha, it saddens me to acknowledge that I now see you following the path of reckless promiscuity and loneliness that often accompanies your sister. Perhaps it's an inherited trait, a sad legacy. By the time you read this, I will have completely removed myself from your life, ensuring that our paths never cross again. The extent of your betrayal has left me reeling in a pain I couldn't even fathom. The intensity of my pain is beyond measure. Nevertheless, I am grateful for the 24 years of happiness we once shared, and for the 2 wonderful children you gave me. Trying to be fair and honest, I will be brief in this farewell. May you quickly return to the arms of your beloved, leaving behind our broken family. I thirst for a justice you couldn't provide. Did your dissolute escapades bring you any satisfaction, or revenge for your actions? The man you were with, judging by the grandeur of the mansion, was quite wealthy. I no longer have the desire to see or talk to you. We have nothing left to discuss. Our lawyers will handle all the necessary procedures, and I ask that you promptly sign the divorce papers. The reason for our separation is of no importance. By 10 in the morning, I was at the bank. I responsibly addressed our shared credit card debt and promptly closed the accounts. Taking immediate action, I visited the bank to obtain a cash receipt for our entire savings and securities. Additionally, I ensured that there were sufficient funds in the checking account to cover the mortgage and utility bills for the next 2 months. Taking a further step toward independence, I removed my name from the joint account. Upon leaving the bank, I held a substantial check amounting to approximately $250,000. Before noon, I arrived at work, surprising my boss, who had expected me to be in Minnesota. When I shared the news of my immediate resignation and relocation, his surprise grew. Our relationship held a unique meaning that transcended the typical employer-employee dynamic. My boss had maintained his current position because I turned down a promotion, and initially, he wasn't pleased and felt indebted to me. But 2 years ago, during his divorce, I explained that my decision to decline the promotion was due to his situation. Since then, our relationship had evolved from a traditional boss-employee arrangement into one of equal partnership. He began by stating that he understood my desire to resign and was willing to accept it. Instead of going through the HR department and writing a check for my 401k, he had an alternative proposal. He offered me an opportunity in their newly established optical division in Tucson. Although the salary would be lower than my current position, there were reportedly affordable housing options there that would enable me to secure decent housing at an attractive price. We sealed our agreement with a handshake, and he agreed to spread the word that I had chosen to leave my job voluntarily. The next step was to meet with my lawyer and explain my decision to separate from Martha. I instructed him to serve her with the divorce papers and grant her the power of attorney to sell the house, which represented 50% of our total assets. Although my lawyer, who was also a close family friend, attempted to persuade me to consider alternative scenarios, he soon realized the significant changes awaiting me. By midnight, I would be in another city, in another state, and without a wife. In the afternoon, as profound fatigue overcame me, I sought a place to rest and stumbled upon a rather dated motel. Around 8 in the evening, using a disposable phone I had acquired for this purpose, I dialed Ross's number and explained that it was my new phone number. Ross inquired if I had heard from Mom, and I revealed that I had found out the day before, that she had been unfaithful. He expressed his disappointment and concern, asking what I planned to do about it. I shared that I had taken care of everything. I had packed my things, cleared my bank accounts, resigned from my job, and was heading south, ending my relationship with her. I also mentioned that she would receive the divorce papers by the end of the week. Ross asked if Amelia knew, and I informed him that she didn't yet. I assured him that I would keep him informed and promised to call regularly. We exchanged expressions of love and care, and I reassured him that I loved him and would take care of myself. After concluding the conversation, I contacted Amelia. The conversation was filled with deep sadness. My children, with heavy hearts, learned the truth about their mother's actions and how they had affected our family. Witnessing the destructive influence of Aunt Victoria on her family, my children, like me, tried to comprehend how their mother could inflict the same pain on us. I was certain that Victoria had influenced her sister to act in this manner. Amelia, always candid, broke the silence by asking how long it had been happening and how long we had ceased to be enough for her. I comforted her by explaining that the duration and reasons were no longer important. What mattered was that I had loved her deeply, trusted her with all my heart, and she betrayed that trust. I reassured Amelia not to worry and said that I would be okay. I mentioned that I was incredibly sad at the moment, but I believed I would heal over time, especially if I could maintain some distance from her mom. I also assured her that I would share my new address and that she could come to me once her school year was over. As I made this promise, tears welled up in my eyes. I wanted Amelia to know that there would always be a place for her by my side. In Tucson, the optics division was relatively small, with only 30 employees. The district manager, who bore a stronger resemblance to his father than to a stern boss, fostered a sense of camaraderie and comfort within the team. I immediately felt like a welcomed guest, which provided some solace during a difficult time. A month later, I chose a lovely house in a condominium. Throughout this period, I maintained no contact with Martha, relying solely on updates from my lawyer and my children. Moving forward was not without its challenges. One situation proved particularly demanding. My lawyer informed me that Martha was ready to contest the divorce, expressing her unwillingness to proceed with it and her readiness to fight to the bitter end, even if it meant financial ruin for both of us. In response, I calmly instructed my lawyer not to proceed with the divorce in court. I said I didn't care anymore, and that I wanted to give her the chance to rebuild her life after the 24 years of happiness we once shared. Together, I instructed my lawyer to tell her that I had no desire to continue the relationship and that I wished her a good life. I added a more colorful message to tell her to go to hell. When I asked my lawyer if he could deliver that message, he, recognizing our close connection, replied that he could do it with pleasure, but warned there would be an additional $150 fee for this service. Conversations with the children were more challenging. One by one, I had to convince them that there was no turning back on this decision. The first hurdle arose when Amelia told me, "Dad, Mom completely freaked out when I mentioned that I planned to live with you this summer." I promised Amelia that I would do my best to visit her and her grandparents. However, Her reaction was so concerning that I found it necessary to step away from my phone for a few days. Martha's behavior worsened when Ross decided to split his summer between both of us. As for Martha, I consciously refrained from inquiring about her, focusing on moving forward with my life. It wasn't easy because remnants of my feelings for her still lingered, a mix of emotions tied to our shared past before the betrayal. Yet with my children's help, I gradually learned more about Martha's state of mind. To my surprise, it turned out she was going through a deep depression, mirroring the emotional shock I had once experienced. It's just unbelievable, especially considering what happened to her sister. The concept is quite simple. When you cheat, it hurts the very people you should love, which leads to the destruction of your marriage. Afterward, you continue to live your life. So how could Martha be depressed when I did everything possible to enable her to carry on without my presence? Her reluctance to divorce seemed like an escape from reality, a way to avoid facing the fact that her actions caused our family to crumble. It's absurd, isn't it? For a few hours, I was in denial myself, but she had been living in denial for the past 2 years. Even though she knew our children were in regular contact with me, she used our children as a way to express remorse for her actions. Through them, she tried to convince me that she was willing to do anything to prove her love for me. Although I understood that our children held hopes of reconciliation between us, I just couldn't bring myself to agree to talk to Martha. The geographic distance between us was also an issue for them, as they had to choose between their mother and me. Martha was relentless in her pursuit of my whereabouts from our children. All she knew was that I lived in one of the southern states. It had been almost 3 years since I left her, and she finally managed to discover my location. One fateful day, leaving work, I spotted her lurking near the office. I couldn't fathom how she found out the city where I now resided, as I had tried to keep that information strictly confidential. Based on what my children shared with me, Martha was convinced that a face-to-face meeting would be enough to change my mind. But I was determined to change her. Mistaken perception. Swiftly and discreetly, I slipped out through a side door, my heart racing, and called Louise to let her know about the situation. Knowing my plan, I deliberately placed myself within Martha's sight, luring her to follow me. When I pulled into the parking lot, Martha caught up with me. To confound her, I drove around the city for a while, stopped at the grocery store, and then returned home. Upon reaching the house, I parked, and Louise, a beautiful 30-year-old Latina, opened the door instead of me using my keys. A moment later, the doorbell rang, and Louise, cradling a 1-year-old baby in her arms, rushed to open it. From my place in the kitchen, I observed Martha's astonishment upon seeing Louise. Louise greeted her with a distinct Spanish accent and asked how she could help. Martha expressed her desire to talk to me. At that moment, Louise called out to me from the doorway, and I took the baby in my arms. Louise told me to take care of our daughter while she finished preparing dinner. I turned to Martha and began, well, with a mix of surprise and irony in my voice. I met her gaze, acknowledging the situation. I inquired with a resolute yet attentive tone, asking Martha what she wanted after almost 3 years apart. She responded in a barely audible whisper, confessing that she needed to apologize and convey how deeply sorry she was for the pain she caused me. She acknowledged that it wasn't my fault, but rather her own foolishness. Martha expressed her love for me then and now, describing me as the best husband and father a woman could hope for, while admitting her own thoughtlessness and genuine remorse for the suffering she had caused. I found her sincere apologies moving, but I knew it was essential to end this charade promptly. I replied, "Well, it's all right." Feigning happiness, I continued, "As they say, all of this is in the past. I haven't dwelled on these memories for so long that I can genuinely say I forgive you." As I looked at Tamarita, who was radiating joy while in my arms, I continued, "In conclusion, I sincerely wish you a joyful life filled with love, much like mine." My voice carried genuine sentiments. Martha's tears streamed down her face, and she mumbled something unintelligible. She hesitantly approached, embraced me, and hurriedly left the house. I closed the door behind her. Louise, noticing my fragile state, emerged from the kitchen, feeling relieved and sad. She gently took Tamarita from my arms, sensing my need for comfort. I leaned against the closed door, giving in to tears. Touched by the scene, Louise hugged me tightly and planted a gentle kiss on my forehead. With a determined look, she reached for the phone. She said, "I need to let Horatio know that I'll be heading back home with our daughter soon," her voice exuding warmth and confidence. I whispered, "Thank you, Louise," sincerely appreciative of her presence and unwavering support. I instructed Louise, "Make sure to tell Horatio I'll be waiting for you at the barbecue on Saturday." Her voice brimmed with enthusiasm. "Absolutely, boss. I'll see you at the office tomorrow." The following week, my lawyer received the divorce papers duly signed by Martha. As I moved forward, I realized that healing takes time and I needed to find my own pace. I formed connections with several female friends, engaging in a close relationship with only one, devoid of any serious commitments. It appeared that I was finally moving past the pain that had been inflicted on me. I grew less fearful of women, shedding my nervousness and timidity. Recognizing this personal growth, I began to think it might be time to grant Louise the freedom to introduce me to a kind and suitable woman. Trusting her judgment, I contemplated the opportunity to meet someone who could bring genuine happiness back into my life. Now, I'm reconsidering my decision after this unexpected encounter. Doubts have arisen, not about leaving Martha, as that decision remains steadfast, but about my prior assumption that we had nothing in common. I've always believed we had nothing to discuss, assuming she understood my stance on infidelity and how I'd react in such a situation. However, listening to fragments of Martha's story during our recent conversation, I'm beginning to question if I should have avoided this confrontation, despite my aversion to it. One thing, though, is undeniable. Removing myself from her life was the best course of action for me. It allowed me to find peace and recover, away from the toxic environment that engulfed us. I loved Martha so much that if I had encountered her at that moment, I might have succumbed to her remorse and accepted her apology. This could have led to more suffering and eventual divorce. But now, 3 years since her betrayal and our separation, Martha's apology suddenly gave me a sense of closure. It released me from the pain I'd been carrying and offered a glimmer of hope for love once more. Over time, I might even contemplate revealing that I don't actually have a second daughter, though I'm not certain I'll decide to do so. I no longer owe her anything, and the choice to disclose or keep it to myself is mine to make. I finally unburdened myself of obligations to her, allowing me to move forward and embark on a new chapter in my life, but not for long. Yesterday, I stood by Martha's grave with my children and numerous relatives, including Victoria. I wept bitterly like everyone else present, but I didn't see a single tear on Victoria's face. Martha, in a state of complete despair and inebriation, was involved in a fatal accident. Her life couldn't be saved. I contemplated for a long time why Victoria had encouraged her sister into a reckless relationship with her lover, and arrived at only one explanation. It was a form of revenge for Martha and me, revealing her betrayal, which had led to the end of her marriage with Mike. Perhaps now Victoria feels some sense of relief, as her sister lies in a casket. And I know one thing: I will never love any woman the way I loved Martha.
Story 2.
Husband shocked ex-wife's wedding with her affair partner, causing guests to cry for help. My name is Angus McDougall, and my wife is Margaret Sullivan McDougall. She prefers to be called Maggie. I come from Scotland, and she comes from Ireland. Of course, that should have been my first hint that we weren't a good match, but dang. I fell head over heels for her the moment I saw her beautiful blonde hair, green eyes, and amazing body. We first met a decade ago when I had just left the army and started college with her. She was 18 and I was 22. I was studying culinary arts thanks to the GI Bill, while she was pursuing an accounting degree. Somehow we clicked, probably because she loved chocolate and I dreamed of making all kinds of chocolate treats. My mom adored chocolate and it was always in high demand. While most chocolate businesses thrive during Christmas, my shop stays busy year-round, especially during Valentine's Day, Easter, and even Independence Day. Valentine's Day rivals Christmas in terms of chocolate sales, and my shop does even better during that time. But I really dislike my first name, Angus. Seriously, Mom, did you have to pick Angus? I go by Mac to everyone. Nobody calls me Angus, not even my wife. Well, except for my parents when they're mad at me. Otherwise, it's always Mac. Maggie had just informed me that we needed to have a serious conversation. Instantly, I felt uneasy, as every guy knows what those 4 words typically imply when said together. It's usually a precursor to bad news, like a breakup or divorce. So with a sinking feeling, I took a seat and looked at her, sensing that my world was about to shatter. We'd been together for 10 years, happily married for 8 of those. Well, at least I had been happy. I assumed Maggie had been too. As I sat there, I pondered the possible reasons for her impending revelation. Was it about our bed life? Unlikely. We were intimate regularly, having marathon sessions 4 or 5 times a week, and she always seemed satisfied. Money problems? Doubtful. I had a 6-figure income, nearly $250,000 after all expenses, including payroll, taxes, and overhead. Financially, we were more than comfortable, earning close to $375,000 combined annually. Could it be that she no longer loved me? Not from my side, I loved her deeply, but had she stopped loving me somewhere along the way? Just a week ago, we were discussing starting a family. Interrupting my thoughts, she slid a dreaded manila envelope across the table. "Maggie, please confirm this isn't what I suspect it is," I said. I glanced at her, but her expression revealed nothing. I'm sorry, Mac, she said softly, her voice filled with regret. I should have talked to you sooner, but I want a divorce. Why? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady despite the turmoil inside me. It's complicated, she replied, avoiding my gaze. You found someone else, I stated more matter-of-factly than I felt. Surprisingly, I didn't explode in anger. Yes, she admitted, almost in a whisper. For how long? I inquired, my disbelief growing. God, what's happening to me? I should have been furious, pacing and shouting at her, but instead, I felt numb. 8 months, she confessed, her voice barely audible. 8 months, I echoed, trying to process the betrayal. You've been cheating on me for 8 months, and this is how I find out. I sighed, resigned. I guess you'll take everything in court. Since California doesn't favor alienation of affection, I don't have much recourse. No, Mac, she said softly, shaking her head. Your business is yours. The house is mine, inherited from my grandparents, but I'll give you a few days to move out once you've found your own place. I'll be asking for some minimal alimony until I marry again. It won't break the bank, though. I sighed heavily. Do I know him? I asked after a pause. If you lay a finger on him, you'll end up behind bars, she stated unnecessarily. I wanted to confront him, but risking my business wasn't worth it. I get it, but I think I deserve to know who's been screwing me over for the past 8 months, I said, shrugging. Reginald Pennington, she replied, keeping her head held high. Son of a gun, I muttered. That revelation was bombshell number 2. I despised him even before this. Now I was furious. I closed my eyes, trying to calm down. Reginald Pennington, blonde, blue eyes, filthy rich from old money and outrageously snobbish with a streak of bigotry. I'd warned Maggie about him after a dinner where we discussed charity work together. She brushed off my concerns, thinking he was harmless. Yeah, right, harmless like a rattlesnake. I'd first met him at a charity event in our community, and even then, I didn't like how he looked at Maggie. He regarded me with disdain, and her with blatant desire. Barely keeping my anger in check, I finally met Maggie's gaze again. Well, I guess there's not much I can do about it now, I said, trying to appear indifferent. I wish things hadn't come to this, Mac, she said, her smile bittersweet, a facade I could see right through. She was just trying to soothe my pain, but I saw right through it. That's not true, Mac, I replied calmly, my mind already plotting. But whatever. I won't argue the divorce if that's what you want, I continued. I'll review the papers with my lawyer before signing, I added, and she nodded in understanding. I would expect nothing less, Mac, she said. Just so you know, it's not about anything you did or didn't do. Reginald and I have a deep connection. I still love you, but I'm in love with him, she explained, apologizing for the situation. What a load of nonsense. She was in love with his wealth, his family was loaded. At a charity ball we attended, he got too close to Maggie while dancing, and I noticed him adjusting himself afterward. I knew he couldn't satisfy her like I could. I almost laughed when I saw his excitement under his tight pants, but I held back, not wanting to cause a scene yet. I'm sorry too, I replied instead. After our talk, she handed me the manila envelope. You'll be served officially in the morning, Mac, she informed me. We'll meet with my lawyer at Tim's office. This is just a preview of what I want from the settlement, she added. Tim Grayson, my childhood friend and longtime lawyer, handled all my legal matters, including my chocolate factory. You know what? Drop the alimony, and we have a deal, I suggested, hoping she'd agree. She seemed to consider it. If she agreed, maybe I wouldn't go through with the plan I was already forming. No, Mac, I need something out of this. After all, I wasted 10 years of my life with you, she replied firmly. Oh, hell no. That statement, that our entire marriage as well as our time together while dating and engaged had been a waste of her time, really got to me. I glanced at the proposed alimony and raised an eyebrow. She wanted $2,200 a month for 2 years, or until she remarried. That was about half of what I made monthly after expenses and paying my workers. I could manage it considering my savings. I acted like I needed to think it over. Fine, I guess it'll be worth it, I said, shrugging. I'm packing up now. I'm leaving tonight, I declared. And that's what I did. I packed my clothes, toiletries, and my extensive music CD collection, which ranged from Marty Robbins to Metallica to Mozart, even including some Sir Mix-a-Lot. I loaded everything into my 1968 Mustang Fastback 390 GT and hit the road. Within an hour, I was on the phone with Kat. Hey Mac, what's up? She answered. Kat, I just got kicked out and I'm getting served divorce papers at Tim's office tomorrow. Maggie thinks she's trading up, I said bitterly. Damn, seriously? Kat sounded surprised. Yep, I'll stay at the Holiday Inn until I find a place, I replied. No way. Get over to my place right now, Mr. Man, she insisted in her no-nonsense way. All right, yes ma'am, I chuckled, unable to resist her command. Good. See you soon, she said before ending the call. I smiled and shook my head. Katrina Monroe is the manager at my chocolate factory. She resembles Aisha Tyler but younger, just as tall, standing at 6 feet. We all call her Kat, and she doesn't mind. Her boyfriend, Darius Jackson, plays guitar in a rock band, which makes him cool in my book. He's on a road trip now and won't be back until next week. That gives me a few nights at Kat's place in her guest room until he returns. Heck, Darius is cool with me, so I might stay longer. But no, I need to find my own place. I could probably buy a house outright with what I have in the bank, but the community property split hasn't happened yet. Darn, I'll likely have to rent an apartment for a while before I can afford my own house. Again. My thoughts are interrupted as I realize I'm near Kat's Louisiana ace. Her boyfriend only stays there sometimes, but he's been pushing her to move in with him in LA. Kat won't budge yet, though. She wants a full commitment from him first, like a ring-on-finger commitment. So here I am, 32 years old, still in good shape, already a millionaire but dumped and wiped out by the woman I married, my soon-to-be ex-wife, the cheating gold digger. I pull into Kat's driveway and park next to her little Ford Fusion. That car looks tiny compared to mine. I smirk as I rev the engine one more time before shutting down the big V8. As I open the trunk and grab my suitcase, Kat comes out wearing Daisy Dukes and a tank top. I catch my breath as I admire her full breasts straining against the tank top, her long silky legs, and her gorgeous round behind. I quickly push those thoughts aside. Closing the trunk, I walk toward Kat, who lets me in without saying a word. The expression on her face shows disbelief mixed with other emotions. I think I was still in shock at that moment. Yes, shock was the only thing keeping me going. But as soon as I stepped inside, I dropped the suitcase and fell to my knees. The weight of what had happened finally hit me. I had kept it all inside, but now it poured out of me in tears. I sobbed uncontrollably, and Kat wrapped her arms around me. Her presence kept me anchored, preventing me from completely withdrawing into myself. Shh, it's okay now. You'll be all right, Mac, she said soothingly. No, I won't, I replied, wallowing in self-pity. She hugged me tighter, offering comfort and support. With her help, I got to my feet, and we walked, or rather, she walked while I stumbled, to the living room and collapsed on her large leather couch. Kat checked her phone and found a video of Darius kissing another girl, which was going viral. You've got to be kidding me, she exclaimed, shocked and angry as she stared at her phone. I looked too and saw Darius kissing another woman passionately. Is there something in the water? I mused as I watched Kat's relationship unravel along with my marriage. Must be some cheating epidemic, she snarled. I glanced at her, seeing the anger in her eyes, especially at the fact that Darius was with a white woman. That jerk, he claimed he wasn't into white women. I listened to Kat vent about him for about 20 minutes, then she looked at me and started crying herself. I returned the favor from earlier, holding her as she let it all out. When she finished crying, she looked at me with tired red eyes that looked a lot like mine. Look at us, huh? 2 peas in a pod, she said with a sad laugh, and I smiled as a few tears rolled down my face too. Well, at least Maggie did it to me in private, I shrugged. That jerk did it on national television. I'm so sorry, Kat, I said. Not your fault, buddy, she replied, hugging me tightly, then reaching for her cell phone. Excuse me while I call that cheater and give him a piece of my mind. No problem, I nodded as she pressed his speed dial button. Hey, Darius. Yeah, we saw the video. Mac came over since his cheating wife is divorcing him and kicked him out. No, he's going to be staying with me for a few days just until he can find his own place. No, and that brings me to why I'm calling you. I saw you fooling around with that woman. She paused and listened for a few seconds, rolling her eyes. She silently signaled me to listen in as she put it on speakerphone. But baby, I'm just having fun. You know I have needs. She doesn't mean anything to me. I just need some action on the side while I'm on the road. You understand, he whined and pleaded. That idiot didn't deserve to be in the band anymore, as far as I was concerned. Well, Darius, we're through now, she said firmly. I'll have your stuff sent back to your Louisiana ace in LA. I don't want any contact with you. Got it? But baby, he pleaded, sounding desperate. Nah, you lost the right to call me that when you kissed that woman on TV. I don't tolerate that. We're over, she declared firmly. Do you understand if I'm being clear? Get that through your head right now. Goodbye, Darius. I hope she was worth it. Before he could say more, Kat ended the call and blocked his number. She looked at me with a defiant smirk. Well, that settles it. Zero tolerance. I nodded. Agreed, Kat. Cheaters don't deserve second chances. So, what's she asking for in the divorce? Don't tell me she's trying to take you for everything you've got. I swear I'll knock some sense into her. Kat always had a way with words, and I found myself grinning at her remark. Oddly enough, no. She's asking for $2,200 a month in alimony, probably so I won't stand in the way of her remarrying as soon as possible. But aside from that, the settlement she's proposing is pretty fair, I replied with a shrug. I had cried enough and had reached the acceptance stage of the divorce process. Well, acceptance was a bit far off. I wanted revenge, and now that I was thinking clearly, my plan was forming in my head. It would depend on a few factors, like who was catering their wedding. But the more I thought about it, the more satisfying it seemed. So she's serious about this guy? Did she tell you who it is? Kat inquired. Yeah, and you won't believe it, it's Reginald Pennington, I said with a smirk. Kat's eyes widened. Damn, I never would have thought Maggie was after money. Me neither until now. Seems like she fooled everyone. I shrugged. Her parents never approved of me, so I'm pretty sure they influenced her decision at least a bit. I was never good enough for their precious daughter. All right, I got to admit I let my bitterness slip out for a moment there. Well, damn 'em. You caught me. I can see you're cooking up something, Mac. What's on your mind? Kat always had a knack for sensing. When I was deep in thought, she witnessed it plenty at work whenever I had to troubleshoot an issue in the shop or factory. I'm thinking revenge on a grand scale, I grinned calmly as I confided in her. Just trust me, it'll leave a lasting mark on them. Okay, I'm almost afraid to ask, but what's your plan so far? Kat was now chuckling. I laid out the basics for her, and she burst into laughter. You're one crazy dude, she giggled, tears streaming down her face. All right, let's figure out how to pull this off. And so we did. We stayed up sipping beers and strategizing for when the wedding would happen. Considering I wasn't contesting the divorce, we estimated they'd tie the knot within 3 months, maybe 6 at most. We'd be prepared, and if I could maintain civility with Maggie and yes, even Reginald, I might score an invite without crashing the party. By the time I settled my suitcase and bag in the guest room, it was well past midnight. I told Kat I'd be late to the shop since I had to see Tim to sign the divorce papers in the morning, and she understood. She assured me she'd hold down the fort until I arrived, or I could take the day off if needed. I slept really well last night. Maybe it was the beer we drank, just enough to relax, or maybe it was the devious plan I came up with to make Reginald regret Maggie's wedding. Either way, I was pleased with our scheme. I was up early with a grin on my face. The smell of bacon and eggs cooking on the stove greeted me, waking me up even more. Kat had a fresh pot of coffee brewing too, which was even better. I couldn't recall the last time Maggie cooked me breakfast, but here was Kat doing it, and we were just roommates, for now. After a shower, I threw on a t-shirt and jeans, since I didn't feel like going into the shop after meeting Tim. I joined Kat in the kitchen. Morning, Kat, I greeted her with a smile as I sat down at her kitchen counter. Good morning, sunshine, she replied with a bright smile. You're looking a lot better this morning than when you showed up last night. Thanks to you and beer, I said, giving her a nod which earned me a laugh. Kat's laughter is contagious, so I couldn't help but laugh along. Here's some eggs and bacon for you, hon. Are you heading to work after seeing Tim? She placed a plate of food and a coffee mug in front of me. Thanks, Kat. Nah, I think I'll take the day off. I'm not sure how I'll feel after meeting Maggie and her lawyer to sign the papers, I shrugged. But hey, I'll take you out for lunch later and fill you in on what went down. Kat nodded. You better, Mac. Damn, I'm glad I'm not going with you, she chuckled. If I ever ran into that woman, I'd be tempted to give her a good smack. That's why I appreciate you so much, sweetheart, I flashed a grin. You're the most trustworthy person I know. Ah, I love you too, boss, she said with a sweet smile as I got up and hugged her. Kat was shorter than me, so she fit snugly against me as we shared a comforting embrace. Hey, both our exes were cheating. It's good to see you're holding up too, I remarked as I squeezed her gently before letting go. Thankfully, they weren't cheating with each other. That would have been too cliché, I added, and she let out a snort of laughter which made me chuckle. You're spot on, Mac. A big coincidence indeed, which makes that cheating epidemic theory sound even more plausible. Ah, you and your conspiracy theories, I teased, rolling my eyes but giving her a friendly smile. Hey, the truth is out there, I said with a smirk, and Kat gave me a playful, spooky look. After we tidied up and loaded the dishwasher, she handed me a spare key to her place. This was meant for Darius, but I think you might need it more right now, she said with a smile. Thanks, Kat, I said gratefully, kissing her cheek and hugging her tightly. But don't worry, I'll find my own spot in a few days, and I'll be out of your hair. No rush, Mac. I'd rather have you around where I can keep an eye on you than out there on your own. I've seen how tough it was for my dad when my mom left. "I'm not letting you go through that alone," she said earnestly. "All right, Mom," I teased, and she playfully swatted my shoulder with a smirk. I'd heard about what went down with her mom, who struggled with mental health issues. While she didn't cheat on Kat's dad, her personality problems and mental health struggles led to alcohol obsession and eventually their divorce. I didn't know all the specifics, but it wasn't as messy as my own situation. However, her dad took it pretty hard. To give you some context on our friendship, Kat and I have known each other for 20 years now. She's 2 years older than me and kind of looked out for me when we were kids. Back then, I was smaller than the other boys and often got picked on. Kat, being taller and stronger than most, stood up for me, and nobody dared to mess with her. But she didn't just react to situations. She also taught me how to stand up for myself and fight back when necessary. She learned to take care of herself early on. By the time we were teenagers, I had finally grown enough to be slightly taller than her, just barely though. I hit my last growth spurt during sophomore year of high school, while Kat had already stopped growing. She's 6 feet tall and I'm 6 feet 1 inch. We've been that way ever since. We've both filled out since our skinny days, but we're still in good shape. She was a hurdler on the track team, and I played baseball. While Kat was skilled enough to earn a scholarship to USC, I didn't make the cut for a baseball scholarship. So I ended up joining the Army, and later used my GI Bill benefits to pursue higher education. When I opened the chocolate shop before marrying Maggie, Kat applied for the manager position with her MBA. I hired her quickly. In the beginning, I couldn't pay her much, but once our reputation grew, business boomed. With a great team, Kat stood out as the best. After a year, I left her in charge for our delayed honeymoon. She kept things running smoothly, and by the end of the first year, we were on track to pay off the bank loan and give everyone a raise. By the third year, the shop expanded into a small factory with a kitchen. We secured contracts for cocoa beans and introduced exotic blends. By our fifth year, we were filling special candy orders across California, but I refused to franchise despite lucrative offers to buy the company. My employees and I declined. They preferred working for me. So I kept it small with 20 employees, focusing on enjoying our work while making money. This decision didn't sit well with Maggie's father, who wanted to expand the business. Politely but firmly, I rejected his proposal, expressing my desire to maintain a family-like atmosphere. He criticized my decision, insisting expansion was the only path to big profits. I defended my stance, emphasizing that I was already making good money and didn't want to become greedy like him. I casually wondered what Maggie's family would think of her cheating on me with, then divorcing me for Reginald Pennington, and realized I didn't care. But they probably approved. Old money tends to attract old money, and while the Sullivans weren't as wealthy as the Penningtons, they still belonged to old money. Forget it. Kat and I left that morning after breakfast. She decided not to work while I went to see Tim at his office. When I arrived, Maggie hadn't shown up yet, so we chatted until she arrived. When she walked in, Tim visibly tensed. I could tell from his body language that Maggie and her lawyer weren't the only ones present. I turned around, and sure enough, there was little Dickie Pennington himself. At that moment, I wanted nothing more than to wipe the self-satisfied smirk off his face. Instead, I ignored his extended handshake and looked at Maggie. "Well, let's just get this over with," I said with a shrug. Tim reviewed the proposed division of assets. Since my business wasn't funded by her or her family's money, and the house was a gift from her parents after her grandparents passed away, they weren't considered community property and remained ours. My Mustang belonged to me, and I'd been fixing it up since high school. Tim surprised me with a question about my reason for divorcing his client to marry Reginald Pennington. It caught Maggie off guard, and she hesitated to answer. Tim pressed for a straightforward response. Maggie's lawyer, a wannabe in all red, whispered something to her, and she softly admitted to the plan, looking ashamed. Tim didn't address her as Mrs. McDougal, and he inquired about the timing of the wedding plans. As they whispered among themselves, Tim leaned over and whispered to me about alimony, trying to help me avoid paying her anything. When they finished, Maggie confirmed the wedding plans would proceed soon after the divorce. Tim then revealed Reggie Boy's substantial wealth. He questioned why Maggie would ask for alimony from me when she could easily get money from Reggie. Maggie conferred with her lawyer, and Tim exchanged a quick grin with me. Gloria Jr. asked what I suggested as fair compensation, and I replied she could have all the furniture, not just her share. "I'm not bothered by that," I said with a shrug. They gathered in another huddle, speaking in quieter tones this time, before breaking and turning to Tim. "Agreed," stated the lawyer. And so it was settled. I didn't have to pay alimony, but I also didn't receive any furniture. Gloria Jr. made the necessary adjustments to the divorce papers, which we all signed, except Snake Boy. The filing would happen later that day. Once the lawyer left, on my way back to my car, Maggie and her companion approached me. "Angus, old boy, hope there's no hard feelings," he said, extending his hand for a shake. I took his hand and squeezed it firmly, causing him pain. "Call me Angus again, Reginald, and I'll make your life miserable. To you, I'm Mr. McDougal. Got it?" I released his hand and he looked genuinely fearful. "Yes, Mr. Mac McDougal, please let me go," he pleaded. I let go, warning him it was for calling me Angus. As for Maggie, I held no grudges. I smiled, walked away, feeling relieved. Getting out of alimony felt like a win. "Oh, one more thing." I turned back to them as Maggie helped her companion to his feet. "Before I go, I need my grandma's engagement ring back," I stated, extending my hand. Maggie stared at me as if I had just landed from Mars. Then she removed both the engagement ring and the wedding band and handed them over to me. "Thanks," I said with a smile, pocketing both rings before heading back to my car. I revved up the powerful V8 engine and shifted into gear, releasing the clutch and hitting the gas. The tires screeched as I peeled out of the parking lot, leaving a trail of rubber on the asphalt and smoke in the air. It wasn't something I did often, but I wanted to send a strong message to the lovebirds. Glancing in my rearview mirror, I saw the jerk standing there, still nursing his right hand. I smirked happily as I drove towards the shop. When I arrived, Kat and everyone else greeted me warmly. They hugged me, shook my hand, and offered their condolences. I thanked them all and jokingly told them to get back to work, appreciating their efforts to lift my spirits. Despite the legal fees and the loss of some furniture, I felt pretty good. "Come on, Kat," I said. "Let's grab lunch." We rode in Bullet, and Kat enjoyed the experience. She could feel the power of the engine and the excitement it exuded. Over lunch, we laughed and shared stories, strengthening our bond as friends who had both recently experienced betrayal. "I still can't believe I had no clue she was cheating on me," I admitted, expressing my frustration at my own ignorance regarding Maggie's affair. "I must have been really naive." "No, Mac, you were in love. Love can blind us, you know," Kat said, smiling as she reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I couldn't help but smile back. "Thanks, Kat," I replied, returning the squeeze, showing her how much I valued her support both at work and in my personal life. She was more than just my office manager and friend. She had become someone I relied on for a long time, from back in school when I was the small kid to now as a man trying to make my business thrive. She had always been there. "You never have to thank me, Mac. A nice bonus at the end of the year is thanks enough," she said with a grin, which made me chuckle. "Consider it done," I replied, meeting her gaze with my own. She looked away first, and I noticed a faint blush on her face. It caught me off guard, but I quickly regained my composure. Despite feeling a stirring of attraction, I reminded myself that she was my friend and had just gone through a tough time. In all the years of our friendship, I had never seen Kat in that way before. I had always viewed her as a friend, albeit a very attractive one. Sure, I couldn't help but notice her beauty, like when I saw her the previous night at her house, but that was just a natural reaction. This felt different. I realized I wasn't prepared for it, so we swiftly changed the subject. After we finished eating, I drove Kat back to the shop and left her there. She said she'd meet me at home, so I headed to the bluffs and stared out at the Pacific. Looking at my left hand, I took off my ring, which had been there for 8 years. I also took out Maggie's wedding band from my pocket. Just seeing them made me feel sick. Then I retrieved my grandma's engagement ring and held all three together. Putting the engagement ring back in my pocket, I threw the wedding bands as hard as I could into the ocean. They glimmered in the sunlight as they sailed over the bluffs and into the crashing waves below. It felt symbolic to me. My marriage was over, and this was my way of saying goodbye. Even though the divorce process wasn't finished yet, I needed to do this for my own peace of mind, to move forward. But just because I was ending my marriage didn't mean I was giving up on my plan for revenge against Maggie and Reggie. I remembered a line from a song, Violence and Bloodshed, that said, "Payback's a witch, and I'm paying all." I smiled, imagining the music playing in my head, fueling my determination. Reggie was going to pay for stealing my wife, and Maggie was going to pay for being a gold digger. Some might call me vindictive or old-fashioned, but to this I say, to hell with you. Walk in my shoes for 20 miles, then judge me. 3 months later, everything was settled. Our joint accounts were divided equally. During that time, Kat and I lived together as roommates and got along great. No one at work cared about our living situation. The big surprise came when we found wedding invitations in the mail one night. Maggie wasn't joking. They planned to wed a month after the divorce was finalized. I grinned at Kat, and she grinned back. All right, it's go time, I said as we headed to Costco. Finding the wedding caterer was a breeze. He had shown interest in working with us a few months back, but it fell through. I decided to give him another shot and negotiated the deal myself this time. What cracked me up was that Maggie planned to wear white, and so did Reggie Boy in his navy dress whites. He'd been a naval aviator during the early days of the war, while I served in Captain Drake's Alpha team. It seemed the guy couldn't even opt for a regular black tux. A couple of nights before the wedding, I visited the caterer and swapped out the chocolate cake mix with my own special blend. I smirked mischievously as I added the secret ingredient, which wasn't poison, just something to make the wedding unforgettable. My actions might resemble a high school prank, but I needed to get even after being blindsided with divorce papers. Though Maggie had been relatively fair in the divorce, I was left with a broken heart, and they were going to pay for it. I kept Kat informed, and she laughed when I told her about Operation Mudflap. The invitation included the reception, where the real fun would begin. On the wedding morning, Kat and I showered separately but simultaneously. Though we had grown closer over the past months, we were cautious about complicating our friendship. I was relieved when I saw her in a stunning emerald green dress that highlighted her curves perfectly. The fabric seemed to embrace her, unwilling to let go. Her hair was styled in a shoulder-length cut that framed her beautiful face just right. Her full, lush lips were painted in a seductive shade of red, and her green eyeshadow perfectly matched her dress. She wore 1-inch pumps, which made her the same height as me. Her toned calves were visible, and the dress showcased them nicely. Her ample bust was barely contained by the top of her dress, and as she spun around, I caught a glimpse of her caramel-colored back. "Wow, you look stunning," I managed to say finally. She flashed a perfect smile. "Thanks, Mac. You're looking pretty sharp yourself." I felt myself blush at the compliment. "Thanks, Kat," I replied as we headed out the door. We drove to the church and, ironically, Billy Idol's White Wedding was playing on the radio as Bullet pulled into the parking lot. All eyes turned to us, announcing our arrival. Everyone at the wedding, except for us, seemed to be from old money. This was shaping up to be even more entertaining than I had expected. We showed our invitations to the guy at the door, though calling him a bouncer might be too generous. He seemed to be one of Reggie Boy's security guys, accompanying him to public events. It seemed the Penningtons had made some enemies over the years with their business practices, hence the need for security. That didn't surprise me one bit. Reggie Boy's family had a reputation for their do unto others before they do it to you approach. Their version of the golden rule might as well be, he who has the gold makes the rules. And judging by the disdainful looks Kat and I were receiving from the elitist crowd, I felt even more confident about what was going to go down today. As we took our seats in the pew, I leaned over and whispered in Kat's ear, "Make sure to steer clear of any chocolate treats at the reception." She let out a soft laugh at that and quickly kissed me on the cheek. The ceremony dragged on, typical Catholic wedding stuff. I struggled to stay awake several times, but it wasn't a big deal. Reggie did look pretty sharp in his Navy uniform, though. Another reason to despise the guy. He used to be in the Navy before joining his family's business. His Annapolis-class ring sparkled as he awaited Maggie's entrance. Then, as the wedding march started playing, she made her way down the aisle with her snobbish father. I remembered our own wedding and how her father had glared at me the whole time. Now, though, he was grinning proudly, happy that his daughter was marrying into a suitable family. I wanted to punch the guy in the face, but I held back. I knew I'd get my revenge at the reception. And so it went. I won't bore you with the details of the vows she probably didn't mean the first time around, or the exchanging of rings that she tarnished with her affair with that jerk, or anything else for that matter. Then came my turn to act. I congratulated them both with such finesse that I could have won Oscars, Emmys, Tonys, and Golden Globes all at once. Kat would have won for Best Actress, considering how she took Maggie's betrayal as a betrayal of everyone who worked for me and loved her like a sister. Reggie rubbed it in with his Angus old boy line. "I hope there are no hard feelings," he said. I resisted the urge to pummel him into the ground and remodel his face. Instead, I replied, "You're right, the better man did win." Then, to everyone's surprise, I grabbed Kat and kissed her passionately. Kat hesitated for a moment, then returned my kiss with eagerness. Right there in front of Reggie and Maggie, I sealed my claim on Kat with a passionate kiss. That first kiss was incredible. Everything else faded away for a moment as our tongues intertwined and danced slowly, her arms wrapping around my neck while her fingers tangled in my hair. After breaking the kiss, Kat glanced at Reggie and Maggie. "Yep, the best man definitely won," she said with a wink, leaving the newlyweds stunned. We exchanged a grin as we took our seats, enjoying some delicious lobster for dinner. Then came the highlight of the evening as the wedding cake was brought out. Reggie and Maggie went through the traditional cutting of the cake and the playful smashing of cake in each other's faces. Everyone laughed, and guests lined up to grab a slice of cake. We decided to wait until the end of the line for a good view of the chaos to come. And sure enough, chaos erupted as soon as we reached the cake. It all started with an unexpected fart from the bride, a loud one that echoed across the hall. Then the groom followed suit with his own thunderous fart. I loudly excused them, earning chuckles from the snobbish crowd around us. But the worst was yet to come for the couple. Maggie's face turned to horror as she let out a gurgling sound, followed by an unpleasant odor. Reginald's face twisted in disgust as he caught a whiff of the stench, then emitted a similar gurgling noise from his rear. They exchanged horrified looks as more guests joined in with their own bodily sounds. Soon the couple was sprinting for the restrooms, leaving behind a trail of embarrassment. Brown fluid could be seen dripping from beneath Maggie's dress while Reggie attempted to conceal a growing stain on the back of his pants. They made a frantic dash for the restroom, followed by other guests who realized they had also soiled themselves. Kat and I left quietly, trying to stifle our laughter, but we couldn't hold it in once we were in the car. Tears were streaming down our faces as we laughed so hard that it felt like our guts would burst. "Oh my God, Mac," Kat said between fits of laughter, clutching her stomach. I was laughing just as hard. "Do you think I went overboard?" I asked amid the laughter and tears. Kat laughed again. "Well, the boxes at Costco said it was effective but warned not to use too much." Our laughter finally subsided a bit and Kat asked incredulously, "How many boxes did you pour into the cake mix?" "All of them," I replied with a serene smile, prompting Kat to burst into laughter again. I had added powdered chocolate-flavored laxative to the cake mix intended for the Pennington wedding. Most of the cake and cupcakes were laced with laxative since I replaced much of the cake mix with the powdered laxative. I also mixed some with the regular cake mix to balance it out, but I didn't expect it to take effect so quickly. That was just the beginning. Then I dealt with the caterer. I pretended to negotiate a contract with him for the chocolate from my factory. He had contacted me earlier, and I had delayed responding. I explained that we had been experiencing some delays due to illnesses among my team, but now that we were back on track, I could provide him with samples. He seemed eager, thinking I would fulfill his desires. During the tour, he proudly mentioned catering the Pennington wedding, unaware that the bride was my deceitful ex-wife. I played nice, but as soon as he dismissed his staff for the day and retreated to his office after shaking my hand, I knew it was time to act. He promised to prepare the contract paperwork and inform me and Tim once it was ready. However, it seemed like he completely forgot about the contract in the days following the wedding. Once everyone had left for the day, I headed to the kitchen's back door, propped it open, and brought my car around. I replaced the powdered cake mix with the powdered chocolate laxative and swiftly left. I ensured the kitchen door was securely closed and made sure not to leave any boxes behind. Following the principle taught by Captain Drake, never leave a trace. He was a stand-up guy. The last I heard, he left his military position and became a history professor at UCLA. By the day of the wedding, any evidence tying me to the laxative-infused cake had vanished. Only Kat and I were aware of the plan, and she kept it under wraps. When Kat and I returned home, she looked at me seriously. "Mac, about that kiss earlier," she began. "Kat, I know I crossed a line, but you look stunning and I couldn't resist," I confessed. She gently placed a finger on my lips. "Let me finish. That kiss earlier was incredible," she said. "You're a good man and quite impressive for a white guy. What I'm trying to say is, I think we could be great together." She blushed slightly and I leaned in for another kiss. Our lips met and we kissed tenderly, feeling like we had been missing out on something special for a long time. After our kiss, we gazed into each other's eyes. "I think we could be great together too," I said with a smile. And she smiled back. Once inside, we kissed slowly again. I gently removed the straps of her dress as we kissed. We made love, and it was truly amazing. Some may wonder why I orchestrated the caterer setup as I did. The issue arose when the owner made advances toward Kat during her initial negotiations with him, when he first expressed interest in working with us. After Kat firmly rejected his advances, she advised against doing business with him. However, when they were chosen as the caterers for the Pennington wedding, I saw an opportunity to address two issues at once. The fallout from the brown wedding, as the media called it, was immediate. News outlets covered the event extensively the next day, capturing images and videos of the bride, groom, and guests rushing to the toilets. I invited all the folks from the shop to Kat's house to watch the chaos unfold. Although we weren't shown in any of the scenes, everyone knew we had been present. We laughed so hard, tears streamed down our faces as the high society guests scrambled to handle the embarrassing situation. The only folks I felt bad for were the janitors who had to clean up that mess afterward. About a week after the disastrous wedding, the cops came by asking questions. Kat and I had gone to the wedding, but we both said we left when things got messy because we were worried about getting sick. We kept straight faces during our interviews and burst out laughing only after the detectives left. We never heard from them again. Reggie Boy sued the caterer, but the caterer skipped town instead of paying up. Last we heard, he fled to Italy, his home country. Not sure what happened to him after that. Reginald Pennington IV was caught in bed with another man's wife less than a year after the wedding. Who caught him? The woman's husband, and he wasn't too kind to Reggie Boy. He called Maggie, and she had some choice words for Reggie when she arrived at the offended husband's house. Maggie showed up on our doorstep shortly after that. At least Reggie ended up losing a testicle in the fight that ensued. It turned out that while she had no qualms about cheating herself, she wouldn't tolerate her husband cheating on her. A bit of a double standard, don't you think? Yes. Kat and I moved into a bigger place since her small 2-bedroom wasn't quite cutting it. Our new home was a 4-bedroom ranch style, and I had it almost paid off by the end of the first year. It seemed Reggie Boy had made Maggie sign a prenup stating that if she filed for divorce for any reason, she'd leave with only what she brought into the marriage. She still had her $125,000 a year job, but that was it. No billions for Maggie Sullivan. It was late the following year when we heard a knock on the door. Kat was 4 months pregnant, so I gave her a quick kiss and went to answer the door myself. I opened it to find a tearful Maggie. "What do you want, Maggie?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. "I'm sorry, Mac. So sorry for everything," she sobbed. "You were the one who wanted something better," I said with a shrug. "What happened?" I asked. "I caught Reginald cheating on me," she admitted, crying even harder. "Well, that's rough," I said sarcastically. "Mac, I'm really sorry," she said, cutting herself off as she noticed Kat, who was pregnant, walking up behind me. "Baby, who is it?" Kat asked as she joined me. She smiled at Maggie. "It's Maggie and she's leaving," I said as I closed the door on my ex's face. I locked the door and embraced Kat. "She's the past. You're my future. I love you, sweetheart." "Ah, I love you too, baby," she said as she kissed me. Kat and I eloped shortly after finding out she was pregnant. It was a small civil ceremony, her idea, and we became husband and wife. She's still my manager at the shop, and she's still one of my best friends. I love my wife.
Story 3.
"I can't control my emotions," I exclaimed as steam billowed from my ears. Across the bar, my friend Shelley flashed a simple grin, casually wiping down glasses and tending to the bar with the skill of a seasoned bartender. This was Shelley's bar, named after her late husband, a clever nod to his legacy of helping patrons claim they frequented Jim's. It was a cozy spot, a joint Shelley and Jim had fought tooth and nail to keep afloat. Jim's relentless toil eventually led him to an early grave, leaving Shelley to use his life insurance to settle debts and honor his memory by keeping the bar alive. "All right, Barb," Shelley chimed, topping off my wine glass. "Let me get this straight. You're not upset that Dean, your husband, cheated? It's about who he cheated with?" I took a sip, contemplating her question. "Blaming me, Shelley? Have you seen her?" The woman in question, Marge, was a sight, overweight, chain-smoking, and vocally brash. She held down a middle management job in some bureaucratic abyss, churning out documents for yet another pointless government agency. Shelley set a few more glasses on the bar counter. "Barb, you realize that Marge and Dean's fling happened before you even met Dean, right?" Glancing around the nearly empty bar, save for a couple of guys shooting pool in the back, I shook my head. "Who cares, Shelley? I'm dead serious. Look at me." Rising from the bar stool, I spun around, showcasing my yoga-toned physique before settling back down. "And compare this body to, well, hers," I grimaced, conjuring an image of Marge in my mind. "It's just not right." Shelley draped the towel over her shoulder. "Your husband Dean made a commitment by marrying you. I don't get why this is bothering you. What if he wasn't the one who ended it?" Learning that Marge and Dean had been an item for over a year, I grimaced. "What if Marge dumped Dean? That means I signed up for a guy who wasn't even good enough for Marge." "It's sickening, Barb. Again, what a contrast. What one person discards, another cherishes. Marge's loss is your gain." "Easy for you to talk, Shelley. You're not the one having to sleep with a guy who's been messing around with Marge for over a year." Shelley leaned casually against the counter, a smirk playing on her lips. "Maybe Marge had some bedroom skills that kept Dean interested. Perhaps you two should swap recipes." I nearly choked on my wine. "Just so you know, anyone who's been in my kitchen leaves completely satisfied and always craving more." Shelley arched an eyebrow in response. Glancing around discreetly, I continued, "I may not be a saint, but I'm far from being some sleazy streetwalker." Shelley chuckled, giving my shoulder a comforting pat. "Physical engaging is only scandalous when done right." I could feel my face flushing as I replied, "Shelley, please, This is serious. I'm not okay with this. Shelley shook her head. Physical engaging takes the least time but causes the most problems. Ignoring her remark, I traced my finger along the rim of my glass. It's just hard to envision a future with Dean when his past with that Marge woman keeps haunting him. Shelley shook her head, fixing her gaze on me. Barb, have you ever heard the saying, "The past is behind you, learn from it. The future is ahead, prepare for it"? Then a somber expression clouded her face. Don't you adore Tom the cat? I adore that massive black feline. He's the largest cat I've ever laid eyes on, like a pint-sized panther. Great, I retorted. Dean and Tom have always been a pair. Maybe Tom can show Dean how to land a proper job. In the 5 years we've been married, Dean hasn't held down steady employment. He's never put his business education to use. Shelley regarded me with a puzzled expression. You can't be serious. People from abroad ship their antique wooden pieces here for restoration. Yeah, I get it, but it's uncomfortable at our office gatherings when Dean mentions he's into woodworking. I dislike the idea that he comes off as some rustic lumberjack. He could have climbed halfway up the corporate ladder by now if he wanted. Instead, Dean prefers tinkering in the garage. Barb, I've seen Dean's garage. It's more like a professional workshop, better equipped than many woodworking shops. That's my garage, I snapped. Part of my grandfather's home, which he left me after my parents passed away. But didn't Dean completely renovate all the wooden floors in the house? Yes, but... And all the moldings and doorways, too. Yes, but what about the front porch steps and trim? Sure, but let's not forget about the fireplace, Shelley remarked, reaching under the counter and producing a magazine. She slid a glossy 2-page spread in front of me. Barb, isn't that you? On the elegant staircase Dean crafted from scratch, featured in National Home magazine. All right, Shelley, but I was the one dealing with all that dust. And now your house is on the county's historic register. If Dean had taken any of those job offers he had after school, we could have made a decent amount of money and hired someone else to do that kind of work. You don't know what it's like to rely solely on one income, mine. It's not a situation that leaves me thrilled. Shelley rolled her eyes. I believe it was Groucho Marx who once said, "What good is happiness if it can't be bought with money?" I took another sip of my wine. Seriously, Shelley, Dean getting turned down by Marge and his meager income aren't exactly the keys to my happiness. What's the key? Do you really think having enough money unlocks happiness? Shelley shook her head. Seriously, Barb, my goodness, were you and your siblings blessed with intelligence? Do you understand how antique restoration generates income? Are you making payments on that new Lexus you got last year? Well, no, I stuttered. Dean paid for the car in full right after I picked it out. Shelley set the magazine aside. Having a lot of money doesn't make you special. More often than not, it just means you're fortunate. Swirling the wine in my glass, I couldn't help but remark, "It's easy for you to say. The last time I saw Dean in a suit was at my mom's funeral. The guy practically lives in faded jeans." Shelley stretched, placing the glasses on the top shelf. "It was folks in jeans who built this country. It's the fools in suits who are tearing it down." Just then, Dean slid into the seat next to me. "So, what are my two lovely ladies discussing?" Shelley turned to Dean. "Tell me, son, how much did your little lumber business bring in last year?" A look of surprise flashed across Dean's face. "You mean the income statement?" He chuckled. "A gentleman never discusses money or his women." Shelley shifted her attention from me to Dean. "We were just discussing your wife's new Lexus. What about you? Have you replaced your old pickup truck yet?" Dean glanced at Shelley, surprised. "Why, it might be 15 years old, but aside from some rust, it runs perfectly fine." Trying to divert the conversation, I interjected, "Speaking of people you know, Marge is now leading the homeowners association next door." "That's nice," Dean replied, absent-mindedly picking up the menu. "Shelley, is my order ready?" Just then, one of the pool players signaled for another beer, holding up an empty bottle and gesturing 5 fingers. Shelley stepped away to attend to the order, leaving Dean and me alone. "Dean, did you catch what I mentioned?" Dean turned the page of the menu. "Of course, Barb. You mentioned that Marge is now heading the homeowners association. It shouldn't bother us. The house is in great shape. You're not concerned." Dean set the menu aside and glanced at me with a puzzled expression. "Huh? I don't care if the house is in great shape." "You idiot," I exclaimed, pushing the menu away. "I'm talking about Marge." Dean looked genuinely embarrassed. "So what about Marge?" "God, you men can be so dense," I sighed. "You and her." "Me and her what?" Dean inquired. You two have met before? I used my fingers to gesture quotation marks around the word met. Dean shook his head. Yeah, Marge and I dated before I met you. So what? Before me, you were dating the quarterback, Mr. All-American High School. That reminds me. Could you call him tomorrow and check on our car insurance? I want to extend the coverage on your Lexus. There's a difference, Dean. The Mr. All-American High School, as you called him, now sells us insurance, is married, has 2 children, and a picket fence that you helped him install, I explained. A smile spread across Dean's face. Ah, I see. You want 2 children. That's great, Barb. You know I've been eager for us to start a family. Don't worry about your job. I've got orders lined up for the next 2 years. You can always return to work after, Barb. Dean's voice trailed off as I stormed off my bar stool and out of the bar. The house felt chilly over the next few days. Perplexed, Dean gave me space, burying himself in his workshop with yet another of his projects. Shelley said I was overreacting, even suggesting that too many women seek the right person instead of striving to be the right one. But I couldn't shake my feelings. I mean, who wants someone else's leftovers? That's why I found myself at Marge's house, hoping to uncover the truth. Sure you don't want a beer? Marge asked, settling into a chair in her pantsuit, cigarette in one hand and a store-brand beer in the other. No thanks, Marge, I replied, perching on the edge of her couch, careful not to touch anything. Surveying Marge's home, I couldn't believe she had any say in matters of taste. Her decor resembled a 60s trailer park, with lion and leopard prints adorning every surface. Suit yourself, Marge shrugged, popping open the beer she held in her hand. Her little dog leaped into her lap and she affectionately petted it, making kissing noises. Let me tell you, Barb, if there aren't any dogs in heaven, then when I kick the bucket, I want to head wherever they are. Marge continued conversing with the dog before turning to me. Lots of folks talk to animals, but not many bother to listen to them. That's the issue. I struggled to keep my stomach settled, the smoke stinging my eyes. Marge, I'm surprised you're still smoking. You know you work for the government with all its anti-tobacco regulations. Marge exhaled a plume of smoke. It's been proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that smoking tops the charts in terms of statistics. Attempting to join in with a light chuckle, I shifted the conversation to general homeowner inquiries, aiming to uncover the real motive behind my visit. However, Marge struck me to the punch later in our discussion. Does Dean still have that big old black cat, Tom? I winced before replying. Yes, Marge. Tom the cat still belongs to Dean. Marge took a sip of her beer. Darn it, that cat never belonged to anyone. Tom came and went as he pleased. She took another sip from the can. Dean mentioned we used to bump into each other back when that other guy was president. I don't think you were around then. Yeah, Dean mentioned you two used to be an item, Marge exclaimed, slapping her thigh. Have you guys crossed paths? Damn, we were like rabbits in bed for over a year. I couldn't get enough of him. I tried not to reveal my surprise. So, you and Dean have split up. What happened? Marge shrugged before taking another sip. He just wasn't my type. Sure, he's a nice guy. Handsome, a bit on the skinny side for my taste, but funny, great in bed and all that. Dean's just not my cup of tea. I attempted to keep my composure, though internally I was seething. Got it. Not your type. I composed myself before asking in a non-confrontational tone, Is it true? Did Dean do something to cause the breakup? Marge shrugged once more before replying. No, nothing like that. I'm sure he's a great match for someone like you, but Dean wasn't the man I was looking for. I laughed nervously, though inside I wanted to explode. Wow, Marge, sounds like you're searching for Superman. Grinning as she sipped her beer, Marge chuckled. Well, it's nice to have a superhero around, if you catch my drift. She crushed the beer can before tossing it into the nearby trash. As much as I'd love to keep swapping stories about our exes, I've got to get back to business now. Barb, any homeowner questions for me? I swallowed back the bitterness, wondering if Marge could sense the steam rising from my ears as I retrieved the folder from my purse. Meeting Marge only worsened my already foul mood. Dean pondered, realizing I didn't want to talk. He gave me space, diving into his workshop and volunteering as a youth soccer coach. With Dean away on a 2-day trip, I found myself at Jim's bar, seated beside Shelley as she polished glasses. The bar was moderately busy for a weeknight, with a particularly boisterous group of suits at one table. Where's your acrobat? Shelley inquired, pouring me a glass of white wine. I took a sip before responding. Dean took his truck to fetch some old wooden relic that some wealthy fool wants to restore. If they have so much money, why not buy new things? What's the appeal of paying 10 times more for some old junk when you could have something good and new? Shelley shook her head. Are you talking about Dean or his latest project? Both, neither, I don't know. It's all just so disheartening, I lamented. Shelley tossed her towel over her shoulder. Care for some cheese with that wine? She rolled her eyes. Life isn't solely about your destination. It's about the journey and the experiences. Dean's a great guy, so quit complaining. I stared at my glass. Shelley, I've got problems. Shelley reached across the counter, giving me a mock peck on the cheek. Quit whining. You're fixating on first world issues, like misplacing your TV remote, your Starbucks coffee being too cold, or an email attachment taking too long to load. Problems that impoverished people elsewhere would love to have instead of, say, struggling to access clean water or medicine for their sick child in a distant, unaffordable hospital. I recoiled. Just because my issues aren't as grave as others doesn't mean I'm problem-free. Yes, that's true, Shelley replied, her voice tinged with frustration. You hit the jackpot, Barb. Good job. Great health, loving husband. Need I say more? I'd give up everything I own just to spend 20 minutes with my late husband. You were born with a silver spoon. Stop thinking you're unhappy. Shelley's outburst stunned me, but she continued. Listen, Barb, you can't be the bride at every wedding, the corpse at every funeral, and the baby at every baptism. Feeling insulted, I was about to retort when the bar doors swung open and a group of sweaty men in baseball uniforms flooded in. Shelley's mood instantly lifted. It's going to be a lively night. It's the Gay Men's Softball League. I grimaced. You let guys like that in here? She gave me a pointed look. Seriously, Barb, if by guys like that, you mean men with disposable income who spend generously on drinks and cause no trouble, then yes, not only do I welcome these guys, I actively seek them out and welcome them. This is a bar, after all. Before I could respond, a towering black man approached the counter. He was the largest person I'd ever seen, standing over 6 feet 10 inches tall and weighing around 250 pounds. The buttons on his broad chest strained against his uniform, emblazoned with the team name Master Batters. Shelley must have been acquainted with this towering man, as she didn't protest when he reached over the counter and effortlessly lifted her up, much like a child lifting a Barbie doll. Set me down, Leroy, Shelley squealed as the giant gently placed her back on the ground. No problem, Shelley, Leroy responded in his deep baritone. Thought you might want to meet the MVP of the Northeast League Southern Division Western Champions. Shelley shyly batted her eyelashes. Does your husband know you're flirting with the opposing team? Leroy burst into laughter. I wasn't always gay, just got sucked into it. It seemed to be an old joke, as Shelley merely rolled her eyes. Sorry, Leroy, you know I don't mess with any man under 9 inches. Leroy pondered for a moment. Damn, Shelley, I'm not chopping off 3 inches. I was taken aback by their banter, but Shelley seemed unfazed, even when Leroy ordered, That'll do, sweetheart. Bring 6 jugs of your finest draft ale for my fellow Batman warriors. He paused. And some Pepsi, too. Shelley began arranging the jugs on the counter. Who's the teetotaler and why's he in my bar? Leroy looked puzzled. That'd be me, starting a 3-day shift at the fire station tonight. Shelley turned to me, filling the jugs with beer. Barb, my only waitress is out sick, and I'm short-handed tonight. She gestured to a group of suited men at a corner table. Can you handle them? We've helped each other out in the past. Shelley and I used to waitress together during school, so it's no big deal, I assured her. A rowdy group congregated at the table adorned with costumes. Ties were loosened and jackets draped over chairbacks. A burly man, reminiscent of a former athlete, appeared to be the ringleader. Hey guys, I greeted them with a smile. What can I get for you? I endured the usual barrage of comments about my phone number or physical attributes, a routine every waitress dealing with intoxicated men has faced since taverns started serving drinks. Over time, I'd become immune to such remarks from fraternity types, mentally filtering them out to the point where they barely registered. One of the men in suits stood up, towering over 6 feet tall. Must have been my lucky day, he quipped, gesturing to the table. Sorry about the commotion. My buddies are celebrating my recent promotion. He handed me a business card, confirming my suspicions. Below the name, in bold gold font, read the title, Senior Vice President, Interdepartmental Technology, Southern Hemisphere. Impressive, I remarked, attempting to return the card. He waved it off. Keep it. I'm feeling generous. So, let's have another round, but only if you join us for a drink. I hesitated, but the table erupted into chants of drink, have a drink, escalating until I relented just to appease them. Meanwhile, Shelley was busy filling beer jugs while I tended to the drinks for my table. She noticed the business card I'd left on the bar. "Whose is this?" Shelley inquired, nodding toward the shiny new card. I gestured toward the corner table. "The gentleman at that table, the tall one. Looks like he's the new bigwig, and it seems he's got some cash to spare." Shelley wiped the foam off the card's edge. "Remember what Grandma used to say about money not buying happiness?" I rolled my eyes. "They say money can't buy happiness, but I'd sure love to cry in my new Ferrari." Chuckling, Shelley examined the card and burst into laughter. "What's so funny?" I inquired. She shook her head, reading aloud. "Vice President of Interdepartmental Technology for the Southern Hemisphere. Don't you see? Look at the initials. Shh, IT head. Your CEO's a idiot." Snatching the card, I scrutinized it again. After a moment, I shrugged. "So what if it's not the classiest title? He still seems like a big shot." Shelley remained unimpressed. "Big shots are just small fry to other big shots. Mind your manners." I chuckled it off, but Shelley placed her hand on my shoulder. "Don't play the fool, and don't do anything stupid to retaliate against an idiot." Shaking off her grip, I retorted, "I won't. It's just a little jab back at Dean from Marge. I'll just have a few drinks with them to keep things in check. Free drinks are free drinks. You know the saying, all the best things in life are free." Shelley wasn't ready to let it go. "The best things in life may be free, but they come at a hefty cost." In my defense, I was so intoxicated that I hardly remember what transpired next. I can't recall leaving the bar, reaching my house, or climbing the stairs to my bedroom. There are faint recollections of being carnal with the idiot in my bed, followed by a feeble climax. I think I momentarily sobered up during the second or third round when he accidentally caused me pain. "No!" I yelled, evading him and nearly tumbling off the bed, barely discernible in the darkness. He nudged me with his paw. "You're not leaving me hanging, are you? I've still got one more round in the chamber." My head throbbed now as the inevitable hangover kicked in, and I started feeling remorseful about my actions. Placing my hand on his chest, I said, "Listen, I think it's best if you go. I can't have you staying the night. How about whipping up some breakfast?" I really didn't need that right now. My headache was worsening. "Real funny, but seriously, I need you to leave." I gestured toward the bathroom door as he got out of bed. As he made his way to the bathroom, I glanced at the clock on the dresser. Its red LEDs displaying 3:18 a.m., the sound of running water ceased, and the strip of light under the bathroom door vanished. Amidst a creeping hangover and burgeoning guilt, reality began to sink in. Just as the bathroom door swung open, revealing the undressed silhouette of the idiot, the bedroom door creaked open simultaneously, revealing the outline of a figure holding something in their hands as they stealthily crossed the threshold. I shrieked, causing the intruder to halt in his tracks. Creep burst out of the bathroom doorway, snatched a table lamp from the dresser, and struck the intruder on the back of the head. The unexpected blow sent the uninvited guest crashing to the floor. My screams ceased as I switched on the bedside lamp. Hastily dialing emergency on my desk phone, I pleaded, "Send the police! There's a burglar in my house!" as the emergency operator began her scripted response. I glanced at Creep, who was using a lamp cord to bind the intruder's hands behind his back, and a chill ran down my spine. Roses, dropped by the intruder, littered the floor. Beside his hands lay a pair of work boots, presumably carried when he was struck. They were Dean's worn-out work boots. Creep finished securing the knots, muttering, "You damn burglar, think you can sneak up on me?" As Blockhead grabbed the intruder by the hair, lifting his head from the floor, my blood turned to ice as Dean's bloodied face came into view. A soft groan escaped his lips. I leaped off the bed, approaching my husband. "Get away from him, it's my husband." Blockhead wore a puzzled expression as he released Dean's hair, causing his face to thud against the floor. "Your husband? What the hell?" He didn't finish his sentence as a low growl emanated from the darkness beyond the bedroom door. For a moment, two yellow eyes glared at us before a swift black blur emerged from the darkness, latching onto Creep's face. Blockhead's screams mingled with a fierce growl as Tom the cat sank his claws and teeth into his head. They spun around as Blockhead leaped up, attempting to pry Tom off, colliding with the window. Eventually, he managed to wrench the big black cat away from his scratched and bleeding face. Dodging a furious kick, Tom darted under the bed to safety. Grasping his injured face and swearing, Blockhead cursed as I dropped to my knees, reaching for Dean's head. Suddenly, excruciating pain shot through my left bum part, as if dozens of knives had pierced me. Letting out a scream, I frantically tried to rid myself of the source of agony. Tom refused to release his grip, causing me to whirl around in pain, screaming the entire time. After what felt like an eternity, I stumbled upon Blockhead still nursing his bleeding face and cursing at the cat. Finally freeing myself from Tom's grasp, he retreated back under the bed, paying no heed to the blood running down my leg. I hopped around, attempting to return to Dean, but inadvertently stepped on Creep's foot. "You stupid idiot!" he roared, withdrawing his hand from his face to deliver a powerful blow to my head, sending me crashing onto the bed. "I'm going to strike you up," he bellowed. Still reeling from the ringing in my ears, I watched as Creep, his hand poised, advanced from the window toward me while I lay disoriented on the bed. However, before he could take another step, I witnessed Dean spring to his feet, his hand still bound behind his back. With a sudden burst of energy, Dean lunged forward, executing a gravity-defying somersault without using his arms. At the pinnacle of his mid-air spin, Dean seemed to rotate around both legs, striking Creep in the chest and forcefully slamming him back into the wall, where he became ensnared in the window curtains. As soon as Dean fell on the ground, he sprang to his feet and dashed toward Creep, who was still ensnared in the curtains. With a powerful shoulder thrust, Dean propelled him backward into the wall, then turned to shout at me, "Run, Barb, run! Get out of here! Call for help! I'll handle this attacker!" I stood frozen in place, gazing at Dean's bloodied face, his hair drenched in blood, as he struggled to restrain Creep with his smaller frame. The curtains tore from the wall as Creep raised his massive forearm and struck Dean's face with a sickening crack. Dean crumpled to the ground. The assailant kicked Dean, who groaned and rolled away from the blow. Advancing toward Dean, Creep raised his foot high to stomp on him as he lay motionless on the floor. However, just as Block's leg began its descent, a black blur darted out from under the bed, and with a piercing growl, Tom the cat seized the assailant's groin. Blockhead's shriek reached such a high pitch that it resembled a woman's cry. The screams persisted as Blockhead leaned over, pounding Tom the cat in an attempt to dislodge the angry feline from his groin. Suddenly, Dean shook his head and surged up from the floor, thrusting his shoulder into the bent assailant's stomach. With a roar, Dean hoisted Blockhead onto his back in a fireman's carry, his legs flailing. At full speed, Dean propelled the three of them toward the large picture window of the bedroom. The cacophony of Dean's roar, Blockhead's screams, and Tom's furious hissing was drowned out by the shattering of glass. I remained frozen on the bed, horror-stricken, as the trio vanished from view, plummeting outside the window into the dark night. Their sounds were abruptly muffled, then ceased altogether. For a moment, the room fell into silence, broken only by the flap of a curtain in the wind from the shattered window. Then came the soft patter of broken glass fragments falling. Suddenly, a piercing, heart-wrenching scream filled the room. It took my brain a few moments to register that I was the one screaming at the top of my lungs. My mind felt shrouded in a fog, but gradually the haze lifted, as if I were resurfacing from underwater. Opening my eyes, I found myself face to face with an Asian woman in a blue hospital gown, gently dabbing my face with a cool towel. Our eyes met, and she set down the towel before hurrying off, murmuring, "I'll go fetch the doctor." As I turned my head, I spotted Shelley seated in a chair beside my bed. Yet my attempt to sit up was thwarted by the restraints securing my wrists and legs to the bed. "Damn it," I yelled at Shelley. "Get that nurse, Chinese, Vietnamese, whatever, and release me." Coming closer, Shelley tried to calm me down. "Take it easy, Barb. You were unconscious all day. They had to restrain you because you were being combative. The nurse, whom I believe is Vietnamese, went to fetch the doctor." Still struggling, I insisted. "Chinese, Vietnamese, it doesn't matter. Just set me free now. I need to see Dean." "Calm down, Barb. You're fortunate I'm here. Leroy, the African-American fellow from the Gay Softball League, was among the first responders on the night of your incident. He remembered you were my friend and let me know you were here and what had happened," Shelley said, her eyes misty as she recounted the events. My body sagged with shame at the memory of that night, knowing Shelley was aware of what transpired. She continued, "They had to administer a sedative to you. The whole situation was unpleasant. But don't worry, Leroy got some of his firefighter buddies to use ladders to fix the broken window on the top floor of your house. Although I've been discharged, I had to sign numerous documents stating that I was acting against medical advice. I'll need to schedule a follow-up appointment to formally discharge from the hospital. Blah, blah, blah. I would have signed a confession to the Kennedy assassination if it meant I could see Dean. However, when I glimpsed Dean through the NICU window, it was a shock. He was swathed in bandages, surrounded by tubes, bags, and machines. I was rendered speechless as I struggled to comprehend the medical jargon the doctor used to describe Dean's condition. I interrupted the doctor's detailed medical explanation. "Will Dean pull through?" The doctor paused, and I gripped Shelley's hand tightly. After a moment, he responded, "I believe he'll survive, but it'll be a challenging journey ahead. He'll need multiple rounds of reconstructive surgery and an extended recovery period. Unfortunately, some of the most effective treatments aren't covered by insurance. The procedures necessary for his optimal recovery will be quite costly." In that moment, I realized my deep love for Dean had always been there, just waiting for a tragedy to reveal it. Determined to demonstrate my love, I took action immediately. I emptied my retirement savings to finance his treatment. Early withdrawal penalties and tax consequences were insignificant compared to the need. I secured a substantial loan against my home, increased my credit card limits, and even traded in my Lexus for cash and an old van, believing it would facilitate Dean's transportation after treatment. The longing for Dean was profound. They say you only miss the sun when it starts to snow and the light when the candle burns out. As the weeks passed, life felt like living in a perpetual hell. Dean's mental recovery lagged behind his physical healing. The neurosurgeon informed me that his memory would gradually return in fragments, but the timeline and extent were uncertain. I dreaded the possibility that he might recall the events of that fateful night. I dedicated hours to Dean, reminiscing over old photos, sharing anecdotes, and tirelessly searching for Tom the cat, who vanished that dreadful night. Despite distributing flyers, placing ads, and visiting shelters, the elusive feline remained elusive. Months passed uneventfully until the sight of 2 law enforcement officers exiting the rehabilitation facility sent a chill down my spine. Until then, I had successfully thwarted persistent detectives, using a fortress of medical directives and legal documents to shield Dean. However, my world crumbled when I encountered resistance at the rehab center's front desk. The once friendly guards now wore stern expressions as they barred my passage to Dean's room. "Ma'am, we must insist you vacate the premises immediately," one guard stated firmly. "And we're advising against your return until further notice," the other added. They ushered me out, pushing me toward the parking lot and my car. The following day, a police cruiser delivered a restraining order, prohibiting any contact with Dean and mandating a distance of over 100 yards. Upon seeing Dean, I barely recognized him. Doubt clouded my mind. Perhaps I had erred in the date or location. Over a year had passed since our last encounter, and my life spiraled downward in every aspect. Despite my persistent attempts to reach out, Dean had rebuffed all communication. Yet determined to make our reunion inevitable, I followed the unfamiliar path to the rear of the grand estate. Passing furniture Dean had once restored, I stepped onto the porch to find a stranger before me, bald, with a vicious scar encircling a portion of his head. His once radiant blue eyes, which always brightened at the sight of me, now resembled hard stones, barely flickering with recognition. With a dark mustache and goatee, Dean resembled Walter White from Breaking Bad more than my husband. The sole identifier was the large black cat nestled in his lap, which Dean stroked. The sight of the bald man with the feline resembled a scene from a cheesy sci-fi film, with an ominous villain poised to destroy the world. Taking a shallow breath, I approached them with outstretched arms, hoping for a fresh start with a hug. However, Tom the cat leaped onto Dean's lap, his back arched, fur standing on end, tail raised, emitting a hissing growl with bared fangs. Dean extended his hand, palm facing me, and uttered harsh words. "Stop it, Barb. There's only one kitty here I'm interested in, and it's not you." I stood frozen. The words delivered in Dean's body lacked the smoothness of his usual voice, instead bearing a hoarse, guttural tone reminiscent of Marlon Brando in The Godfather. Collecting myself, I took a seat across from Dean, separated by a small table cluttered with scattered folders and Tom still growling. "Quiet, Tom," I muttered, meeting Dean's gaze. "Where did you find Tom? I searched everywhere for him." "I haven't seen Tom since." Dean maintained his stern gaze, leaving an uncomfortable silence hanging between us. Finally, he broke it. "Well, Barb, Margie brought Tom to me. She found him injured and rushed him to the veterinary clinic. Seems like Tom had quite the pricey hospital stay, too," I muttered under my breath. "That woman," before forcing a smile. "I mean, that was kind of Marge. We'll have to find a way to repay her." Dean continued to pet Tom. "Yes, Barb? You want to talk, right?" I fought back tears. "Dean, I know I've made mistakes. He cut me off. Mistakes make good stories, but lousy marriages. I pushed on. I started to see things differently. I thought I was better than I really was, smarter and more deserving. Now I know better. I awaited Dean's response. Each second dragged on like an eternity before he spoke. Beware of false knowledge. It's more dangerous than ignorance. Why are you here? I'm here, Dean, to apologize sincerely, to show you I understand how you feel. He let out a bitter laugh. Do you? I'd walk with a limp, have constant headaches, and my balance would never be the same. Find someone twice your size to smash your head with a lamp, break most of your body, and then fall 30 feet. Then maybe we'll talk. Wait, don't forget to add being stabbed in the back and betrayed by someone you trusted more than life itself. Realizing you never loved me was worse than rehab, Dean added, grinning. Dean, that's not true, I countered. He chuckled. The truth sets you free, but not before it breaks you. Unsure of how to respond, I stammered, I don't know what to say. Dean, I began, but he leaned back as Tom the cat leapt off his lap. Come on, Barb. Speaking the truth is easy. It's weaving a web of lies that's hard. Or are you using Homer Simpson's logic on me? It takes two to lie, one to lie, and one to listen. My anger started to rise. I'm not some fool, and I see the light at the end of the tunnel, he smirked. We all know light travels faster than sound. That's why some people seem bright until they speak. You seem to fit that category just fine. Trying to stay calm, I said, Did you really have to target Shelley after you filed complaints with the state council? They revoked her liquor license. She lost the bar. Dean intertwined his fingers. Yes, it seems the Drinks Commission takes its rules seriously. They don't allow bar owners to have non-employees serve drinks. Shelley sent you to that table where you got drunk. I see no reason why Shelley shouldn't face the consequences. It wasn't her fault, Dean. The bar was busy that night. Shelley was too overwhelmed to monitor my actions. He glared at me. Shelley wasn't the only one busy that night, were you, Barb? I was nearly in tears. Shelley was my oldest friend. Now she won't even speak to me. And she was also your friend. I dried my tears. Your injury, it changed you, and it's my fault. You've always been such a decent guy, Dean. Why did you feel the need to burn, Shelley? Dean leaned in. Burn, Shelley. Right now I guess I'm just ashes because you know what they say about where nice guys finish. Good guys finish last. Don't mistake kindness for weakness again. He leaned back. So, Barb, if you can't hang with the cool crowd, step off your broomstick. It was a nightmare. You couldn't just take it out on me, could you, Dean? Hasn't there been enough pain and suffering? The DA didn't file charges, calling it a group riot. He gestured to a folder with the state seal. Lies written in ink can't conceal facts written in blood. Blood? Is that what you want, Dean? My blood. We lost Creep's lawsuit because your testimony supported his case. Dean stared. I think that guy who'll never walk again and will live with a colostomy bag deserves better than memories of you. Barb, Dean said, looking at me. Some people are only alive because it's illegal to shoot them. I brushed it off. I'm losing my house. They're garnishing my wages. Our accounts are frozen. We're broke. Dean seemed unsurprised. Yeah, you're broke. It was a statement. He motioned around. I'm just a poor planner trading my work for basic needs. This meeting wasn't going as I hoped. I sighed. I can say sorry a million times, but it seems you're not ready to hear it. Let's just keep talking and deal with things as they come. Dean reached for a document from the pile on the table and tossed it over to me. These are divorce papers. Sometimes you have to cut ties to prevent the crazies from trailing you. Over the next 16 months, my life felt like a never-ending cycle. Job loss due to performance woes consumed me, with drinking becoming my main pastime, leaving little room for work. Going to work felt futile as most of my paycheck went to Blockhead, who spent endless hours fending off creditors until payday. Amidst the chaos, there were glimmers of hope, like job insurance covering treatment for an STD contracted during one of my drunken blackouts. Today marked the lowest point. Outside my former home, I waited for the bank representative to finalize foreclosure, promised $500 for house upkeep, along with whatever remained from selling or pawning belongings from my worn-out minivan, would have to suffice. With 4 nearly bald tires, I set off to my new job, where my elderly aunt ran a tavern near mining towns up north. It wasn't a dream job, but it offered affordable housing amidst the hillbillies in the village. In the depths of my despair, guess who approaches? The woman who triggered this whole debacle, Marge. She strolls with her dog nipping at her ankle, cigarette dangling from her lips. I secretly hoped she'd veer across the street, but no such luck as she strides right up to me. Heading for bail? Marge queries, exhaling smoke. Yeah, Marge, going to help an aunt up north. You know the saying, when one door closes, another opens. Barb, when that door closes, grab a hammer and nails. Seal it shut, Marge advises sternly. I apologize, I reply, observing her dog relieve itself on my minivan tire. Marge takes another drag. You're like some twisted Rapunzel turning gold into straw. You're the only one who's turned Dean, one of the nicest guys around, into a complete idiot. I beg to differ, Marge, I countered. Why does it matter to you? You let him go. How does this concern you? Marge lit another cigarette from the behind of the one she was smoking. You must be the most clueless woman alive. I released Dean because he was too decent to leave me himself. I knew he deserved better. We only connected through a drunken encounter. I'm not as naive as you. I understood Dean was sticking around to spare me from looking like a total floozy. I wasn't inclined to argue with Marge. Look, if I could turn back time and change things, I would. Marge leaned over to stroke her dog. No, you'd probably get injured from time travel, like through sheer idiocy. I gestured to the crucifix hanging from Marge's neck. I thought you were a Christian. What happened to loving your neighbor? Jesus may love you, but that doesn't change the fact that you're promiscuous, she retorted. I waved as Marge and her dog departed. Well, thank goodness this is the last encounter. Marge didn't look back, but I heard her retort. Don't assume you've seen the last of something or someone. With a pounding headache and a craving for a drink, relief washed over me when a BMW finally pulled up, and a well-dressed woman in her 30s hopped out. Her demeanor seemed to declare, I'm in real estate because my husband rakes in cash and I'm bored while the nanny watches the kids. Look at you. You must be Barb. Apologies for my tardiness. It's been a chaotic day. This marks my third citation today with 2 more to follow, she chirped, which grated on my nerves. Oh, the struggles you endure. I suppose you long for the days when bank robberies involved people robbing banks rather than banks seizing homes, I retorted. The bank representative appeared puzzled as she extracted a piece of paper and an envelope from her designer bag. Here's your money, just as we agreed. Hopefully, it brings a smile to your face. Indeed, trading my great-grandparents' home, a family heirloom for generations, for less than a month's salary, fills me with an urge to dance and sing, I replied, dripping with sarcasm. She attempted to soothe my agitation. Don't worry, the house will be well cared for. A group of affluent gentlemen established a trust and purchased it. They've pledged to maintain its original state. Once their caretaker arrives, we'll provide a tour for your confirmation, and then you'll be on your way. Suddenly, a loud crash signaled the arrival of a large motorcycle pulling up behind the BMW. The rider embodied the stereotypical biker image, adorned with tattoos, clad in a leather vest, gloves, and sunglasses. Instead of a helmet, he sported a Harley-Davidson scarf wrapped around his head. As he dismounted, it became apparent that he was short, yet extraordinarily muscular, resembling a sturdy fire hydrant. My spirits sank as the biker directed his attention to the box on the back of his bike. Emerging from it, the big black cat leaped out and stretched on the sidewalk, confirming the biker's identity as Dean. With a noticeable limp, he approached us, pausing to lift his sunglasses, a cigar held between his lips. Dean strode up to the girl, completely disregarding my presence. Let's settle this. You know who. She waved her hand dramatically, dispersing Dean's cigar smoke. I'd prefer if you refrain from smoking in my presence. Dean paused to take the cigar from his mouth, but didn't extinguish it as he spoke to her. Listen up, I'm not here for your thanks. She appeared bewildered. It seemed she wasn't accustomed to such talk at her exclusive club. Attempting a different approach, she gestured at Dean's cigar. Do you realize how injurious that is to your health? Dean glanced at his cigar. My grandpa lived to be 95 smoking cigars, she quizzed with a mocking grin. Really? Dean retorted, replacing the cigar in his mouth. He lived to be 95 by minding his own business. The girl clung tightly to her designer handbag as Dean edged closer to her. Before uttering a word, he gestured toward the house. You're here for your commission? Then, he motioned toward me. Sure, there's a fleet coming into port somewhere and this cheating woman needs to service a bunch of sailors and you can join her for all I care. But first, before you send her packing, take the keys from her. At last, I interjected. Dean, I'd appreciate it if you didn't insult me. Dean's stern gaze shifted to me. Oh, did I hurt your feelings by calling you a stupid woman? My bad, I thought you were already aware. The girl seemed to realize our connection and attempted to diffuse the tension with a forced laugh. Well, everything happens for a reason. Dean maintained his gaze on me as he spoke. Barb, your reason is that you're foolish and make foolish choices. But look at it this way. Jellyfish don't have brains and they've been around for 150 million years, so there's hope. I wished I could disappear. Let's just finish this so I can collect my money and leave. Then you can find happiness. Dean gestured with his cigar toward me. Yes, your presence fills me with delight, so much so that I'd rather restrain myself from clapping my hands in joy. He addressed the bank representative. Hand that envelope to the woman before she starts flagging down cars on the highway and soliciting. I'm willing to bet the only room in the house she damaged was the bedroom from excessive use. His counterpart appeared uneasy, but Dean seized the envelope from her and thrust it into my hand. I noted it was packed with $100 bills. I understand you're not accustomed to getting paid unless you're lying down, but don't fret. You'll be back in that position soon. I fought the urge to throw the money at him, opting for practicality over wounded pride. Turning on my heel, I marched to my worn-out car and drove off, wiping away tears that blurred my view of Dean holding Tom the cat in his arms in front of what used to be my home, reflected in the cracked rearview mirror. It brought to mind another old saying, one from Shelley's grandmother. If you ever want to feel wealthy, count all the things you possess that money can't purchase.
Story 4.
Quietly, and even a few shady business deals that had left several of his clients out of pocket. Sutton smiled grimly. This was the final piece. He gathered everything, all the dirt on Chris, and sent it anonymously to the gossip sites. By the next day, the internet was buzzing again. Not only was Chris now publicly labeled a homewrecker, but his history of unethical behavior came to light as well. His professional network turned on him. Jobs started slipping away, and his carefully crafted reputation as a marketing genius was in tatters. Rena's phone calls to Chris became more desperate, but he started answering less frequently, his responses short and dismissive. Their relationship, built on lies and deceit, was crumbling under the weight of the fallout. The affair that had once seemed thrilling was now a source of deep regret for both of them. Sutton paced back and forth outside the sleek, glass-walled office building where Chris worked. He had been here before, on the day he had sent the damning photograph to Rena, and had watched her crumble. But today wasn't about Rena. This was about Chris, the man who had paraded himself into Sutton's life, wrecked his marriage, and left a wake of destruction. He clenched his fists, the rage bubbling beneath his skin. He was prepared this time. Sutton wasn't a man who allowed his emotions to get the better of him, but the calculated anger he felt needed release. Today, he'd make sure Chris felt every bit of it. Chris emerged from the building, all smug confidence. His tailored suit and designer watch made him look every bit the part of a successful businessman. But Sutton knew the truth. Behind the facade, Chris was little more than a fraud, a man who had no problem lying, cheating, and manipulating to get what he wanted. As Chris turned toward the parking lot, Sutton moved to intercept him. His broad shoulders blocked Chris's path, and when Chris saw him, the sneer on his face faltered for a split second. Sutton, Chris said, raising an eyebrow. To what do I owe the pleasure? His voice was laced with sarcasm, as if Sutton was nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Sutton stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. We need to talk. Chris smirked. Oh, I think we've said all we need to say. You had your little meltdown. What, you want to try and throw another punch? No, Sutton said calmly. This isn't about me and you throwing fists. I came to warn you. Chris chuckled, but it was forced, like he didn't quite believe Sutton's calm exterior. Warn me? About what? Sutton crossed his arms, keeping his gaze locked on Chris. You might think you've gotten away with this. You might think that humiliating me was the end game. But this is just the beginning. Chris shifted uneasily. What the hell are you talking about? You've got some skeletons in your closet, Chris, Sutton said, his voice cold. And I'm going to make sure the whole world sees them. You're not just some innocent guy who got caught up in an affair. You're a liar, a cheater, and a thief. And I've got proof. Chris's cocky grin vanished, replaced by a wary, guarded expression. You don't know what you're talking about. Sutton leaned in, his voice low and menacing. I know more than you think. And when I'm done, you won't just lose Rena. You'll lose your job, your reputation, everything. Chris's jaw tightened. You can't touch me. You're just a mechanic. No one's going to believe anything you say. Sutton smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. We'll see about that. Without another word, Sutton turned on his heel and walked away, leaving Chris standing there, visibly shaken. Rena sat in her car, gripping the steering wheel tightly. She hadn't heard from Chris in days, and the silence was starting to gnaw at her. She had made mistake after mistake, and now everything was falling apart. Sutton was gone. Her career was hanging by a thread, and Chris, her supposed lover, was nowhere to be found. She dialed his number again, hoping he would answer this time. It rang once, twice, and then went to voicemail. "Chris, it's me," she said, her voice wavering. "I really need to talk to you. Things are getting worse, and I don't know what to do. Please call me back." She hung up and let out a frustrated sigh, leaning back against the headrest. The weight of her decisions pressed down on her, suffocating her. She had been selfish, chasing after excitement and passion without thinking of the consequences. Now, she was left with nothing but regret. Her phone buzzed, and for a brief moment, she hoped it was Chris. But when she glanced at the screen, her stomach dropped. It was an email from her boss. Her hands shook as she opened it, and her heart sank as she read the words. "Due to recent developments, we have decided to part ways. We can no longer have you associated with our firm." Rena stared at the screen, the words blurring as tears welled up in her eyes. She had been fired. The affair had cost her everything: her marriage, her career, her dignity. And now, Chris wasn't even answering her calls. She drove aimlessly for hours, trying to figure out what to do. Eventually, she found herself parked outside Chris's apartment building. She hesitated for a moment before getting out of the car and walking up to his door. She knocked, her heart pounding in her chest. After a few moments, the door opened, and there stood Chris, looking irritated. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice laced with annoyance. Rena blinked, taken aback by his tone. "I needed to talk to you. Things are falling apart, and I don't know what to do." Chris sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Look, Rena, I'm not your therapist. I've got my own problems to deal with." Rena's chest tightened. "But I thought we were in this together. You said you loved me." Chris scoffed. "Love? Come on, Rena. Don't be naive. This is just fun. You knew that." Rena felt like the floor had been ripped out from under her. "You don't mean that." Chris crossed his arms, his expression hard. "I do. You need to stop acting like this is some kind of fairy tale. It's over, okay? Move on." Rena's mind raced, her heart shattering into pieces. She had destroyed her life for this man, and now he was casting her aside like she meant nothing. "You're just going to throw me away?" she asked, her voice shaking with disbelief. Chris shrugged. "I've got bigger things to worry about." "You should too." Before she could respond, he stepped back and shut the door in her face, leaving her standing there in shock. Sutton sat in his office at the auto shop, his laptop open in front of him. He had spent the past few weeks gathering every piece of dirt he could find on Chris, and now he had everything he needed. He leaned back in his chair, satisfied with the work he had done. He wasn't a vengeful man by nature, but Chris and Rena had pushed him too far. They had played with his life, his emotions, and his marriage. Now it was time for them to face the consequences. With a few clicks, Sutton sent the files to the local media outlets. Every detail of Chris's shady business deals, his affair with Rena, and the humiliation he had orchestrated was about to be exposed. Chris's career was over. Sutton didn't care what happened to Rena at this point. She had made her choices. But Chris? He needed to be brought down. As he closed his laptop, a strange sense of calm settled over Sutton. He had taken back control of his life. He had done what he needed to do to protect himself, to ensure that no one would ever take advantage of him again. The divorce papers were finalized, and Rena was no longer a part of his life. He had his business, his friends, and his dignity intact. And now, as Chris's downfall unfolded in the public eye, Sutton felt a sense of closure. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. The heavy silence of Sutton's workshop hung in the air, thick with tension. Rena stood a few feet away from him, her chest tight with fear and guilt. She had imagined this confrontation for days, hoping there might still be a chance to salvage something, even if it was just closure. But seeing Sutton now, his broad back turned to her as he worked on a car engine. Any hope she had left began to evaporate. "Sutton," Rena repeated softly, as if saying his name could somehow break the ice between them. Sutton set down his wrench and wiped his hands on a rag, still refusing to face her. "What's there to talk about, Rena?" His voice was low, controlled, but beneath that calm exterior, Rena could hear the simmering anger. "I just need to explain," Rena started, but Sutton finally turned, cutting her off with a look that stopped her in her tracks. His eyes, once warm and full of love, were cold and unrecognizable now. "Explain," he said, his tone sharp. "You want to explain how you destroyed our marriage? How you lied to my face for months? Or maybe you want to explain how you and your lover thought you could get away with humiliating me?" He stepped closer, his face hardening with each word. Rena's lips trembled. She had imagined tears, apologies, maybe even the faintest sliver of forgiveness, but Sutton's resolve was unyielding. She had underestimated the depth of the damage she had caused. "I never meant for it to go this far," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Never meant for it to go this far?" Sutton repeated, his voice rising. "Rena, you didn't just cheat. You lied to me for months, and then your lover," his voice dripped with disgust at the word, "sent me that disgusting picture as a joke. This wasn't a mistake. It was a choice you made over and over again." Rena flinched. "I was confused. Things between us were strained. You were always busy with work, and I felt neglected." She was grasping for excuses, trying to justify what she had done. Sutton's eyes narrowed. "Neglected? So, instead of talking to me like an adult, you ran to Chris? You think that makes it okay? You think that's an excuse?" Rena's throat tightened. "I know I was wrong," she admitted, her voice shaking. "I know I hurt you, but please, Sutton. We were good once. We can be again. We just need to talk this through." For a moment, there was silence between them, a thick tension hanging in the air. Sutton finally shook his head, his expression hard. "You still don't get it, do you?" he said quietly. "There's no we anymore. You killed at the moment you decided he was worth more than our marriage." Rena's heart sank. "Please, just give me a chance. I'll do anything. Therapy, counseling, whatever it takes, I'll make this right." Sutton's face remained unreadable, but his voice was firm. "The only thing you can do is sign the divorce papers." Chris sat in his expensive apartment, a drink in his hand, staring at the news on his phone. He had managed to avoid the worst of the scandal for a few days, but now it was catching up to him. The gossip sites had not only exposed the affair, but also dragged his past into the light. Clients were pulling out of deals, his reputation in shambles. The phone rang, and he sighed, knowing it was Rena before he even picked up. He answered with an irritated sigh. "What now?" "They fired me." Rena's voice came through, broken and small. "I'm finished. They said they couldn't be associated with the scandal." Chris leaned back, rubbing his temples. "Yeah, well, what did you expect? This whole thing was bound to blow up in our faces." "You said you would handle it." Rena shot back, her voice cracking with frustration and fear. "You said this would blow over, but it's getting worse." Chris's patience snapped. "What do you want me to do, Rena? This is as much your fault as it is mine. You're the one who couldn't keep your marriage together." Rena's voice faltered. "You don't even care, do you? I'm losing everything, and you're acting like this is just some inconvenience." "Of course I care," Chris snapped. "But panicking won't solve anything. You're the one who wanted this, remember? You came to me." Rena felt the final threads of her world unraveling. "I thought you loved me," she whispered. Chris scoffed. "Love? We were having fun, Rena. That's all this ever was. And now that fun's over." The coldness in his words hit Rena like a slap. "So what? You're just walking away?" Chris sighed, already bored of the conversation. "Look, I've got my own problems to deal with. We both knew this couldn't last. Just do yourself a favor and let it go." Before she could respond, he hung up. Rena stared at the phone, her hands trembling. Everything she had sacrificed for Chris, all the lies, the betrayal, it had all been for nothing. He had used her, and now he was abandoning her in the wreckage of her life. Sutton had been watching Chris's downfall from afar with quiet satisfaction. The private investigator had done his job well, and now Chris's world was collapsing, just like Rena's. But Sutton wasn't finished yet. He needed to make sure they both felt the full weight of what they had done. He had been preparing for this moment for weeks, gathering every piece of evidence, every scrap of information he could use. He knew Chris was facing financial ruin, and he knew that Rena had been fired. But he wanted to ensure they wouldn't recover. They had taken everything from him, and he was determined to return the favor. Sutton's final move was simple but devastating. He contacted one of the biggest firms in the city, the one Chris had been trying to land a deal with for months. Through his contacts, Sutton leaked all the information he had on Chris's shady business deals, along with the personal scandal. The firm immediately pulled their offer, and word spread quickly. Chris's name was now poison in the business world. The last step was Rena. Sutton knew she was struggling, desperate to find some way out of the mess she had created. She had tried calling him several times, but he ignored her, waiting for the right moment. Finally, he called her back. "Sutton, please, we need to talk." Rena's voice was pleading, broken. "I don't know what to do. I've lost everything. Can't we just sit down and figure this out?" Sutton's voice was calm, but icy. "There's nothing to figure out, Rena. You made your choices. Now you have to live with them. I know I hurt you," she cried. "But please, I'll do anything. I can't live like this. You have to give me a chance." Sutton paused for a long moment, then spoke slowly, deliberately. "You had your chance, Rena, and you chose him. Now you'll live with the consequences of that decision." Rena sobbed into the phone, but Sutton felt no sympathy. "Goodbye, Rena," he said, his voice final. "I hope it was worth it." He hung up, the sound of her crying fading into silence. Sutton felt a strange sense of peace wash over him. The revenge was complete. He had lost his marriage, but he had taken control of his life again. Rena and Chris would never forget what they had done to him. As he stood in his workshop, surrounded by the tools of his trade, Sutton allowed himself one last look at the past. Then, he turned away, ready to move forward into a future that was his alone.